Good morning, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the Black Women in Leadership Sharing and Shaping Our Journey. A special welcome to our honored guests. My name is Crystal Taylor, and I am the president of Ebony Consulting. I will be your moderator today for the forum. We are going to get underway after a few brief notes. This forum was inspired last year by the Honourable Mayann Francis's memoir, An Honourable Life. Mayann's story is not only an inspiration, but also the catalyst that has set the stage to make this event possible. I can't tell you how thrilled I am to see this forum become a reality, with all of you participating in this virtual space today. You know, life is filled with moments, some more significant than others. For me, this is one of those moments where we, as Black women, have created a space where we are at the center of the conversation and where we can share our stories and how we have been leaders, we are leaders, and how many of us may aspire to become leaders. Today, we have the privilege to hear the voices of prominent women, prominent Black women in leadership roles who have great stories to share with us today. Next week, on November 6th, we will keep this conversation going when we'll hear from senior decision makers who will discuss actions and help us advance leadership for women, Black women in the future. One of the most important outcomes of this forum is the learning that will evolve from the conversations. Once this forum is complete, we will be developing and distributing a multimedia report that will outline this learning, including key actions that organizations can take to help make real change for women in leadership roles. And you will all play a vital role in today's discussions, particularly during our breakout sessions a little later on. Before we get started with the presentation, I have a few housekeeping items that I'd like to go over with you. We ask you to please keep your sound muted so we can enjoy and appreciate the inspirational stories that we are about to hear. Please feel free to write your comments and questions in the Zoom chat box throughout the session. We will be drawing upon your questions after our keynote address from Her Honor, Mayann Francis, and again, after we hear from our storytellers. The chat will go directly to Sherry Hodds, who will monitor your questions as they come in. Both sessions, with the exception of the breakouts, will be recorded in order to share this fabulous learning that will be garnered from this forum today with senior decision makers and organizations.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Mary Bluchard, and I have the honor of being the President and Vice Chancellor at Mount St. Vincent University. Although we are meeting virtually, I would like to begin by acknowledging and paying respect to the Indigenous people of the land on which we meet, the Mi'kmaq people. Mount St. Vincent University is built on unceded Mi'kmaq territory. We also pay respect to the knowledge embedded in the Aboriginal custodian of this land and to the elders past, present, and future. We are grateful for the presenting sponsorship support of RBC. We at MSVU enjoy an added RBC investment by way of Regional President, Atlantic Canada, Chris Ronald's participation as a member of our Board of Governors. We are appreciative of the co-hosting partnership with our colleagues at the Atlantic School of Theology, the support of both the African Canadian Women in the Public Service Network and Mount St. Vincent University's Business and Tourism Department is sincerely appreciated. I am so pleased to be here with you this morning to participate in this forum, Black Women in Leadership, Sharing and Shaping Our Journey. The timing of this forum is ideal in that it serves as a wonderful complement to a recent MSVU conversation undertaken between members of faculty and administration entitled Black Lives Matter and Racial Justice Discussion. In the course of that discussion, we spoke at length on some of the very touch points that we will collaboratively consider both today and at the concluding forum scheduled for November 6th. We will speak about avenues to elevate the voices of Black women in professional settings, about means of addressing barriers to opportunities, and about ways in which we can ultimately support and enhance leadership journeys. As I reflect on timing, my singular suggestion would be that the timing could only have been improved had this discussion been undertaken decades ago, but we are here now. In reviewing the agenda and the detailed outline of contributors, I approach today with enormous appreciation for the wealth of knowledge and experience as represented on a roster of contributing speakers and with corresponding anticipation. I look forward as an individual, as an educator, and as the leader of this institution to better understanding what I can do to improve and support the leadership journey of Black women. It is now my distinct privilege to introduce someone who many would agree needs no introduction, Minister Lena Metlach-Dieb. Minister Dieb, newly appointed Minister of Labour and Advanced Education, has long been a champion of women and of women's rights. Elected first provincially in 2013, she was appointed Nova Scotia's first female Attorney General and Minister of Justice. Minister Dieb has overseen and advanced government portfolios, including immigration and the African Affairs and Francophonie. We look forward to working with you, Minister, as together we address the challenges that we're facing in post-secondary institutions at this point in our history. Mount St. Vincent University has what can best be described as a kindred spirit in Minister Dieb. We share a passionate commitment to diversity, to community, and to the advancement of women. And we share a belief that education is, in fact, one of the best means of achieving the foregoing. Minister Dieb has been recognized with numerous awards, including the Queen's Counsel designation, the Lebanese Chamber of Commerce in Nova Scotia Professional Award, Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal, the Progress Women of Excellence Award, and the Canadian Council of Ambassadors of the Arab League Award. She is the daughter of Lebanese immigrants to Canada, proud mother of 4 children, and has 4 beautiful grandchildren. We'll save sharing the highlights of what she does in her spare time for another occasion. Minister, we are most appreciative that you have carved out the time with us today. Your understanding of and experience not only addressing, but overcoming the various obstacles that we will be discussing over the next several hours makes you a most fitting voice to open this forum. Minister Dieb, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone. I'm really delighted to be here with you today. And Mary, thank you very much for your kind introduction. And Neil, Dr. Bennett, I know you're also there. Thank you to both institutions for hosting this event. Really want to begin with saying from the heart, thank you so much for letting me join you in today's conference on Black women in leadership. Very pleased to be here with you today via technology. I would have loved to have been in person. However, This is good too. We're finding out that with a lot of challenges these days, there's actually a lot of opportunities that have arisen, and we all love to use, as women for sure, want to take advantage of all the opportunities we have. So today I am here speaking on behalf of the province of Nova Scotia. But before I say that, I just want to tell you one little thing. When I received the invitation to open this conference, it was actually received back in the summertime, I think. And then as you know, originally you don't really look at things, but then as it gets a bit closer, I looked at it and I looked at the agenda, to be honest with you. And this is sort of what I saw. I'm going to show you this. And I said to, I said to my executive secretary, they call them, I said, can you please go back to the organizer and ask them, did they make a mistake? Do they actually want me? Do they actually want me? Or, is this a mistake? Please go back and ask. I don't know who she contacted, but she told me a couple of days later, no, it wasn't a mistake. They've actually and this was, Mary, let me just say, this was before I was Minister of Labor and Advanced Education. So it had nothing to do with that portfolio. So I'm really honored and thrilled to be on the agenda with such accomplished and inspiring women such as the Honourable Mayann Francis, the former Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia and the first African Nova Scotian woman to be the Lieutenant Governor of our province, who is providing the keynote address shortly. Women on today's panel like Yvonne Atwell, Barbara Manning, Sharon Davis-Murdoch, and Cora Tolliver. Of course, Yvonne Atwell was the first woman of African descent to be elected as the MLA to Nova Scotia's legislature. Women of African descent have and continue to make very important and significant contributions to our province. There are many African Nova Scotian women trailblazers at today's conference, including the women I just mentioned. It's clear you have an inspiring, engaging, and thought-provoking day in store. Today, you will have time and space to talk about the ways in which individuals and organizations can take action and support Black women at every stage of their leadership journey so they can rise, succeed, and achieve their goals. As a woman of Lebanese descent, and I can honestly tell you, I never thought about it before, but more recently, or not recently, I hear other younger generation calling ourselves non-whites, and you know what? For me, it was like, it was a real eye opener. But I am of Lebanese descent. I know firsthand how challenging it can be to pursue a career in executive leadership. I also recognize that this can be particularly challenging for women of African descent. Of course, I don't know and understand what the experience of women of African descent is, but I am committed to more listening, learning, and talking, and taking what I learn to apply it and do what I can as an ally to make change, because we need change. We talk a lot about racism, and yes, it is a global issue. It's a Canadian issue, but it sure is a Nova Scotia issue. And it's an issue in many of our communities and workplaces, and it's an issue we all need to work collectively together on to combat. The Black Lives Matter movement in Nova Scotia and around the world has brought systemic racism and discrimination to the forefront. It is emotional, believe it or not, but we're also witnessing the injustice facing other communities, like the Mi'kmaq community at the moment. And that has been carried on for centuries. So my message today is, I've taken great length to ask my, the people who helped me write these things, because as you know, there's a lot of things that go into being a minister and MLA, is to go through a number of departments at the province of Nova Scotia and to sort of give you some nuggets in terms of what we are trying to do in the province of Nova Scotia that maybe you can share with others, and then let us know what else we can do as a province. But of course, we all know it's not just a government issue. We all have a role to play. We must continue to speak up. We must continue to have conversations, to educate ourselves and learn what we can do to make change and act to address anti-Black racism and help Black women rise and achieve success. As allies, it's important to listen for understanding, listen to console, and listen to take action. We all have a role to play, and it is time for change. It's important for organizations to ensure their workplace, including their senior leadership, reflect the full diversity of our province. In Nova Scotia's municipal elections that we just had a few weeks ago, women made record gains. Cape Breton Regional Municipality elected for the first time a female mayor, as an example, and in HRM, 8 of 16 councillors elected are women, including Iona Stoddard. That represents one of the Halifax districts. This is positive, but there is a long way to go. One election does not undo all the injustices that has been done in our society. So our provincial government is committed to creating a stronger, more inclusive province. 1 year ago, I had the privilege to attend the launch of Count Us In, Nova Scotia's action plan in response to the International Decade for People of African Descent. It is a guiding document that is providing government with specific actions to eliminate the many challenges facing African Nova Scotians. The actions are categorized under the 3 pillars identified by the United Nations: recognition, justice, and development. Since the launch of September 19th, 2019, initiatives have included supporting activities that celebrate African Nova Scotian history, culture, and heritage, helping to facilitate the initiatives and actions highlighted by the Nova Scotia Home for Colored Children Restorative Inquiry Final Report, and supporting the training of African Nova Scotians within government, especially those working with the Department of Community Services who are interested in studying to become social workers. In April of this year, Candace Thomas was appointed Deputy Minister of the Department of Justice, Deputy Attorney General, and a new department as the Deputy Minister of the Office of Social Innovation and Integrative Approaches. She's the first African Nova Scotian female Deputy Minister for the province. Meaningful action on diversity, inclusion, and equity is a priority in our public service. There's a strong network of committees that is making government workplaces more welcoming and inclusive. The Diversity Roundtable is comprised of diversity champions from across the provincial government, providing input into diversity and social equity programming and a diversity lens to corporate programs and services. We have passionate employees in government who have taken the initiative to develop 7 employee networks, including a network for African Canadian women in public service. These networks provide a safe venue to talk about how to improve our workplaces for a diverse range of employees. Through inspiring conversations such as the ones you are going to have today, and when you meet again next week, you will help identify ways to do this and ways to help others understand the importance of this. These are vitally important conversations. As a province and as a society, we need to acknowledge and understand the truth of our history in Nova Scotia and the systemic barriers that exists. By doing so, we'll facilitate the change and break down the barriers in workplaces, in our institutions, organization, and our society as a whole, through awareness, cooperation, education, and collaboration. The Black Lives Matter movement has brought the systemic failures of policing and law enforcement to the forefront in Nova Scotia and around the world. Our justice system has not been fair for everyone, and this must change. A month ago, Premier McNeil apologized on behalf of the current and former governments to members of the African Nova Scotian and Indigenous community who have been failed by the justice system, and announced a commitment to change the movement for fundamental change in public safety in Nova Scotia, work that has been underway by many for generations. So we must work together to dismantle current structures that have allowed systemic racism to perpetuate. We should, all voices need to be given a chance to be heard. All Nova Scotians should be given equitable opportunities to become the best they can be and to reach their goals and dreams. And sometimes by equitable opportunities, some of us need a higher level to start off with because we are on a lower keel to begin with. So we need to raise everybody on an even keel first in order for it to be equal, so that we can actually speak equally, so that we can rise from that level. And I find that a lot of people don't understand that. But in closing, I want to wish all of you an enjoyable day ahead. And I want to thank Mount St. Vincent and the Atlantic School of Theology for inviting me this morning. These events are extremely important for a better future for women, for diverse women, and specifically right now for the women of African descent, so that we can move forward together. Please know that I am an ally. I feel you. I feel your pain. We all have pain, but I think it's what makes us stronger, and what makes us unite. And I believe it's what makes us want to support and advance the work of each other and the work of Black women leaders here in Nova Scotia. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Minister Diab. We really appreciate you taking time from your busy schedule to share your very wonderful words with us this morning. And we do appreciate your support and your ongoing commitment in this work. So thank you once again. Before we go on, we'd like to pause and just give an opportunity to prepare our space for our discussion today with a prayer. And I'd like to introduce you to Kathy Martin. Kathy Martin is a member of the Millbrook Mi'kmaq Band, and she is an award-winning filmmaker. Kathy is currently Director of Indigenous Community Engagement at Dalhousie University. In her role, she fosters partnerships with Mi'kmaq leaders and facilitates communications to ensure Indigenous faculty, staff, and students feel welcomed and supported. Kathy has also previously worked with Native education as a Native education counselor with the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq, based at Dalhousie University. And she was the first co-chair, along with Senator Donald Oliver, of the Indigenous Black and Mi'kmaq Law Program at Dalhousie Law School. Kathy was also appointed the Nancy's Chair in Women's Studies at Mount St. Vincent University in 2015. She is a 2017 recipient of the Order of Canada. Please welcome Kathy Martin. Thank you, Kathy.
Well, Your Honor,
Well,
Minister, well, thank you for inviting me. I apologize for trying to get onto the network, but I don't know, the spirits were trying to stop me today.
you're here. That's the main thing.
No. I think this is a wonderful idea, and of course, Mayann has wonderful ideas. So I appreciate you bringing voice to us. I'm going to open with a chant that gathers all nations together, that Sarah Denny, a true matriarch of our community, taught to me. And I want to acknowledge our ancestors for bringing us here today, for getting us here today. And I want to acknowledge all those today who are fighting, struggling, and looking for ways to move forward together in this area, in this territory. I welcome all of you to the territory of my ancestors, not Chibuktuk, Halifax, but all the way my great-grandparents' hunting and trapping territory was from here down to Lansdowne, over to Parsborough, Falmouth, and down to Tatamagouche. So it's my territory when I welcome you to the territory. In the nation, I invite you to the 7 hunting districts, which goes from Newfoundland, Labrador, PEI, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, parts of Maine, and parts of Quebec. That's our original 7 hunting districts. And that's our nation. And it's a proud day when I can welcome you in 2020 to our nation, and we're still here. I have ancestors as well from the West Indies, and I have relatives from Beachville. And so I wanted to let you know that it's an honor that I'm with you all today. So when we sing, it's a prayer, and it's a time we call all those that we need to come together and help us. And it's also for us to listen to the heartbeat of Mother Earth, to the heartbeat of Mother Nature, to our mother's heartbeat, the beat that we all understood, the language inside of our mother's womb, a language that we all understand because it's our first language and it's the language of our mother. And it goes back to our very first grandmother. We share her water, we share the air that they breathed. And it's also when I drum, I'm asking all of you to come together as one mind to do the work we have to do today. Guano day, guano day, guano day, guano danali. Guanalia, guano danali. Guanalia, guano danali. Guanalia, guano day. Guanalia, guano day. Guanalia, guano da. Hey, ya, hey, no. Daho. I know I got lost for a minute, but sometimes Sarah Denny used to tell me, when you sing and you know that you've done it right, which is when you connect with the ancestors, you go somewhere and then you come back. You know you've done right when you've gone. So I guess I must have gone somewhere and I'm back.
Beautiful.
Well, adios to all of you and enjoy this day. And I'll see everybody when we break out into groups. Well, adios.
Thank you so much, Kathy Marsham. That was beautiful. I'm reminded of what a leading figure in the Christian faith once said, St. Augustine. He said, those who sing pray twice, once in the words and once through the music. So thank you for that beautiful spiritual opening. Good morning, all our distinguished guests, and to everyone attending this important event. My name is Neil Bennett. I'm the president of Atlantic School of Theology, and I'm coming to you from AST campus, and I'd like to recognize that this campus is on the unceded and ancestral territory of Mi'kma'ki. It is a real pleasure for me to be with you today, and just such a privilege. I can't tell you how much it means to me to be introducing you to my dear friend, an inspiration in my life, the Honourable Dr. Mayann Francis. But first, let me say a very warm word of thanks to our co-host, Mount St. Vincent University and President Mary Bluchard, and a very sincere thank you to our generous presenting sponsor, RBC, for supporting the Black Women in Leadership Forum. It's a real pleasure for AST to be in such excellent company in working together to make this forum happen. At AST, our Leadership Learning Initiative is expanding on our mission, and our mission is to shape faithful and effective leaders. It's about leading from values and from that deep place of beliefs. And it's about welcoming diverse perspectives. And the Black Women in Leadership Forum is such an opportunity to listen to and to learn from different stories and perspectives and insights and wisdom, to consider how we can take action and to lead from our values, to be conscious of our impact, and to understand how importantly we can work together to make change and to improve the experience of Black women leaders. In her life's work, the Honourable Dr. Mayann Francis has personified these tenets, and you know this well, particularly in her efforts to advance the cause of justice. I'm reminded of a passage from her Honours memoir, An Honourable Life. In it, Dr. Francis writes the following: "My commitment to my beliefs and faith allowed me to experience freedom from the inside out. With the inner peace, there was a stillness of mind and spirit. The inner voice guided me in all my decision-making. It steered me in the direction to accomplish my vision. I sought to promote unity and strength in diversity, to support equity and dignity for all people." The values that Mayann embodies are rooted in her Christian faith. They are extolled in her book and in so many other ways, and they are manifested in who she is and throughout her life. Every decision she takes, every career choice she has made, every public word she speaks comes from a place of advancing justice. And as so many of you know, justice work is not for the faint-hearted. It often requires the courage to be what we at AST would call a prophetic leader. Prophetic leadership is about calling out institutions and processes in society that lead us away from that path of justice. And by its nature, prophetic leadership calls for the courage to be provocative and the fortitude to hold fast to your values and your vision in the face of criticism. Mayann is that kind of leader. And of course, another word for Mayann Francis is pioneer. The 31st Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia since Confederation, she is the second woman and the first African Nova Scotian to hold the position. Dr. Francis was the first vice-regal representative in Canada to grant a free pardon to Viola Desmond. Mayann made history even before that as Dalhousie University's first employment equity officer and the first Black woman to serve as director and CEO of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission. When you are on the leading edge of justice, you are treading new ground, literally leading the way, blazing a trail for others. And Mayann does that, as the best of our leaders do, with a deep appreciation and reverence for those who have come before her. And she has accepted the call to leadership on behalf of those who will come after her. I personally am so grateful from what I learned from Mayann about leadership every time we talk. I have no doubt that that will be your experience today when you hear her keynote remarks ascending the ladder. But please join with me in what is my greatest pleasure, and that is to welcome my friend and inspiration, the Honourable Dr. Mayann Francis.
Good morning, everyone. First, let me acknowledge our presence in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral territory of Mi'kmaq people. I also acknowledge my ancestors and all those warriors who fought for justice and equality. I thank them because I stand on their shoulders. Minister Diab, President Bluchart, and attendees, welcome. And a very serious thank you to Reverend Canon Neil Bennett for that kind introduction. I kept thinking, is he talking about me? Who's that person? Well, thank you very much. We've known each other for a while, since I've been chair of the board of AST and other ways. And when you applied to be president of Atlantic School of Theology, I was one of the panelists. So that's why you're my friend. So thank you again. It was wonderful. I also want to thank the Atlantic School of Theology and Mount St. Vincent University for their organizing and support of this very important forum. And I also thank the 3 people who are on the committee to bring this together. I know it was challenging, and I say thank you very much. The Atlantic School of Theology Leadership Learning has, for the last several years, been hosting group discussions about leadership. The discussions have been, in my opinion, informative and extremely important. Their vision to place emphasis on leadership includes many discussions on women's leadership. So our forum this morning and next month will focus on Black women and leadership. And thank you for recognizing our importance, regardless of the barriers of racism and discrimination, to society yesterday, today, and as we go forward. It is my desire and my hope that by the conclusion of this forum, there will be understanding and determination to more fully utilize the largely untapped potential of women of African descent. To exclude skills and talent because of race and gender is suicide for our society. It crushes hopes and dreams while demeaning all of us. Many people have asked me, why did I write my story? Writing about your life is not easy. There are times that you have experienced in life that perhaps you want to forget and not talk about. When I was writing, I experienced a series of emotions, from sadness to anger. Nonetheless, I pray to God for courage and guidance to continue to tell my story, because I wanted my experience to inspire people to follow their dreams, to climb over barriers, regardless of who they are and or their circumstances. I also wrote to encourage people to take a good look at themselves and honestly consider pressing issues like racism and discrimination, so that we can all move forward with faith, hope, respect, peace, and love in our hearts. I recognize there are people who won't acknowledge racism and discrimination as their problem. They believe society is fine the way it is. In January of this year, I wrote an article which was published in the Literary Review magazine of Canada. The article talked about why I wrote my memoir. I included in the article, which was titled "A Question of Our Time," the issue of blackface, brownface. Here's an excerpt from that article. Quote, "Make no mistake, painting your face is racist and insulting, but the issue goes beyond the act of dressing up or commenting on someone's turban. The larger issue is about the legacy of slavery and colonization, about microaggressions and unconscious bias, about overt and systemic discrimination. Being the first Black person in any field or profession is a challenge. For me, that has often meant trying to be perfect, because if I was not perfect as the first, there might not be a second, third, or fourth. I would not have survived without my faith in a higher power. I write about this and describe the barriers I have climbed over while on the path to success. End of quote. I have never hidden the fact that my faith and belief in God has played a major role in my career. I said in my memoir, as I grew older and faced many challenges, I relied on my faith in God to keep me strong. My belief in God can be traced back to childhood and my African heritage. People like Frederick Douglass, Nat Turner, Sojourner Truth, and Harriet Tubman risked their lives to free Black people from the bonds of slavery. Throughout their long struggle, Black people relied on their faith in God. They never gave up hope that one day they would reach the promised land. When I was a student at Atlantic School of Theology in 2003, I learned a very valuable lesson about service and leadership. For me, spiritual leadership combined with responsible leadership can be a duality. I often think about the issues that confront us today and the kind of leaders we need to confront climate change, mental health, sexism, racism, sexual assault, homophobia, human rights violations, national security issues, food security, the impact of new technology, and an aging population, just to name a few. I have worked in both private industry and at senior levels of government. Make no mistake, the challenge is real. Working at senior levels in government and private industry are not exactly the same. Working in government, you must add your accountability to the public. As a Black person and a Black woman, whether in private industry or government, I knew that I must work harder than anyone else. It is unfair, but until society becomes fully inclusive, that is our reality. I developed strategies and a thick skin just for survival in some instances. The first strategy is to know your job and much more. Never stop learning. Read everything you need to know and more about your job, the organization or department. If you report to someone, know their role and their job. Understand as much as you can about their leadership. In my memoir, I say, be aware of your surroundings. Know the difference between your true allies and those who pretend to be your ally. Have your trusted advisors both internally and externally with whom you can bounce ideas and vent when you have to. Make sure your advisors are a diverse group, not only in color and orientation, but also people who have something positive to offer you. My advisors were a mixture of business and government leaders, grassroots people, financially successful people, and people from various professional backgrounds, different colors, different religions, and different ages. They taught me the value of discernment and how important it was to be an active listener. These lessons, along with my education and my own common sense, helped me chart a chart of success. Very recently, I criticized the apology for systemic discrimination in the justice system, an announcement by the Nova Scotia provincial government of a design team regarding restorative justice for the Black community and Indigenous people. Without going into details about my comments, which you can hear online at CBC Main Street's website, my top criticism was the lack of consultation by the government with members of the African Nova Scotia community who have worked for years to remedy police discrimination and justice inequality. I view this action as an example of systemic discrimination I knew it was a tough message that would be uncomfortable for some people. I also knew there was the risk of misinterpreting my comments and taking my words personally. Nonetheless, because it is 2020, and because of my love and respect for my race and community, I knew that I needed to speak the truth. I took my analysis back to the days of slavery. I talked about house Negroes, field Negroes, and the slave master and family. I viewed the action and announcement by the government to proceed with the establishment of a design team without consultation with critical and important people in the Black community, a modern day slavery decision-making. My criticism focused on the process used by the government to reach the decision that did not consult with, for example, members of the African Nova Scotian Decade for People of African Descent Coalition. You see, I was always a house, I'll put in quote, Negro, working inside the system that perpetuated discrimination against Black people. Okay, now, being a house Negro is not easy. I said earlier, I was very strategic about being Black because my plan was to always ascend the ladder. I made sure that senior people knew that I was proud to be a Black person, and I was especially sensitive to Black employees and Black communities. The key word here is sensitive. This is not to say that I did not care or understand other groups. I just wanted it to be clear that I expected respect and understanding from them, and I wanted them to be good listeners because I was a proud Black woman who wanted to pave the way for other Black people. I also made sure that my employer knew that my loyalty and my honesty were also with them. In this regard, my strategy was to ensure that they were not impacted by certain decisions that may negatively impact communities vis-a-vis gender, race, orientation, or ability. For me, this internal strategy alone would have an honest, respectable, intelligent, religious, and yes, grassroots contacts as my external strategy helped my climb up the ladder and to be respected internally and externally. I respected confidentiality in all of my roles. I always valued legal counsel and communications people. I frequently sought their advice whenever I felt certain decisions might have serious and embarrassing impacts for everyone involved. Confidence in one's abilities and talents is vital for advancement and promotion. And so is self-pride as a Black woman. As the late Maxine Times says in her poem, Mirrors, quote, I wear it joyfully, I wear it big, I wear it womanly, and I wear it black, 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 end of quote. As a person who has confidence, courage, and great self-esteem, ask yourself, what would you do when you go up to a door, find it closed, open ajar, or wide open? If it were closed, would you try to find a window to climb in? If it were open a tiny bit, would you push it open a little further? And if it is wide open, would you walk through with confidence, courage, and great self-esteem? Would you know how to survive when the system is not really ready for your arrival? These are questions you must think about. One of the lessons I have learned in life is to turn negative experiences inside out and upside down. This is something we all must do, but especially when you are a Black woman. As a Black woman, you will hit barriers. The same door that opened for you could still be slammed in your face if you do not understand what is behind the door, or it could keep you locked in so that you do not have the opportunity to try the second door. Total acceptance by an organization is one of the barriers that Black women face, even in organizations that appear to be female friendly. We are Black people, and as Black women, we must be aware of the psychological impact that racism and discrimination has had, not only on us, but society as a whole. In order to understand, we must go all the way back to the days of slavery and understand the negative impact of slavery on today's society. The impact of slavery from generations ago to our world today is demonstrated by systemic discrimination, white privilege, racism, unconscious bias, microaggression, stereotype, and keeping power out of the hands of by keeping the community divided. As a Black woman and or a Black person, we must not unconsciously internalize negative stereotype about who we are. It takes regular and conscious efforts to shake off internalized beliefs, and we must be a united Black front. For me, it is about a belief in a higher power, God. I have been placed on earth for a purpose, and that purpose is for goodness. Armed with that belief, I continue to move forward with love in my heart. In my lifetime, our society has made some significant advancements. However, with the murder of George Floyd in May of this year, and the higher number of Black people and people of color affected by COVID-19, it clearly demonstrated that racism and systemic discrimination are still alive and unfortunately in good shape. It is time for acknowledgement and true, positive, long-lasting, and respectful change. If your goal is to ascend a ladder, then education and constant learning is mandatory. Never underestimate the value of education, whether it is in a university, community college, or other avenue. Please keep learning. You must be a strategic thinker. How are you going to climb the ladder to strive and thrive? What sacrifices are you prepared to make? Do you want to be a leader? Is the organization prepared to allow you to be a leader? As a Black woman, I believe we can bring a depth of experience and strength to any organization. One of the lessons I have learned in life is knowing when to ask for help. Swallow your pride and do not think you are above seeking help. I always had a godparent. Now, a godparent is different from a mentor. The latter is someone you might see on a daily basis to assist you as you make the way up the ladder. The godparent is usually somewhere behind the scenes in a very powerful position, watching and observing everything you are doing and lending their quiet support. I was extremely blessed to have had numerous godparents who saw the value in who I am. For those of us who want to ascend the ladder by being an entrepreneur, many of my previous thoughts, I hope, will also assist you in being successful. Strategy is essential, regardless of whether you have your own business or are working in government, educational institutions, private industry, or as a politician. Not everyone is cut out to be a manager, director, etc., and that is okay. My advice is to be honest with yourself and find your purpose. Know your strengths and your weaknesses. Know who is for you and against you. Develop a thick skin, as I said before. Do not sacrifice short-term gain for long-term pain. If you want to be in a senior role, be prepared for what comes with it, because it is not an easy road. You have the double challenge of being a Black person and a woman. Know the culture of the organization, as well as knowing everything else about the organization. Never forget who you are, because if you do forget, rest assured, someone will remind you. That reminder can be overt or covert. You cannot afford to fall asleep at the wheel. As I said earlier, I always knew I had to work harder than anyone else because of my skin color. Until we live in a world where skin color or other outward characteristics does not matter, we have very little choice but to be better than anyone else. This means total sacrifice if you want to be top manager. Remember that one mistake or giving bad advice that causes challenges for the organization might be held against you and negatively impact your climb up the ladder. I believe society will have achieved success when we can walk into an organization or the government or boardrooms and see Black women and Black men and other equity groups at all levels. I look forward to the day when firsts are no longer a big thing. I am more interested in finding out the number after the first. Before I conclude my remarks, I want to say this to organizations, whether private or government. Organizations need to be honest. They cannot and should not park Black women and Black men in certain positions in order to bolster their management statistics. Organizations must be prepared to totally diversify their organization from the top down with people who demonstrate promise. Organizations should be prepared to support qualified people once they have been identified. If an organization were still trying to diversify after 15 to 20 years, I would have to question their commitment. The organization must be creative and serious about having a more diverse and inclusive workforce, which includes Black women at top levels, or a strong commitment to ensure that the road is clear for them to ascend the ladder. The final chapter in my memoir talks about the anchors that helped me ascend the ladder to success. My religious upbringing and my faith have helped me maneuver the complexities of life, a life that I knew would often be a challenge because of the color of my skin and the racist behavior I face. I have the courage, the integrity, the love for all peoples. Again, love for all peoples, strength and hope to keep going, practice forgiveness, and forge a path for others to follow. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you so very much for sharing your remarks with us this morning, Your Honor. As always, your words are so inspiring, and I'm sure you have generated many thoughts and questions for those who have joined us today. So I'd like to take this moment and invite folks to simply jot down a few questions you might have for Her Honor, and we will have a few moments to have Her Honor respond to your questions. Before we do that, I would like to begin by asking a question. When we consider, that employment equity was established back in 1986 by federal government legislation, and here we are in 2020. And when you look at representation of equity groups in government in particular, we see that those who have advanced, still, we don't see representation of all groups. But in terms of women, women were one of the designated groups who was added in the employment equity legislation after, was one of the last groups, in fact, to be added to employment equity. And one of the first groups who have benefited the most. But when I say benefited the most, I'm talking about able-bodied white women. The reality is that women have certainly advanced and have moved up into more senior level positions in government and other sections, other departments, and even boards. But when we talk about Black women and other diverse groups of women, we still see significant underrepresentation. The fact that we have just recently see our first African Nova Scotian appointed to a senior position, deputy minister in government in 2020. I personally don't think that's anything to celebrate. This is 2020 and we're celebrating our first. So my question is, how can white people who are not senior decision makers best support Black women leaders, and even those women who aspire to become leaders? So can you talk a little bit about that?
That's truly a very important question. And it is very disturbing when you look at when employment equity came about, which was way back in the 80s. And when I came back here in the early 90s and the first appointed to Dalhousie to deal with employment equity. And I think part of the major issue in terms of equity was that there was a lack of understanding of what it actually meant. And I think that people at the time, we'll just bring them in and have them work on issues that are dealing with race and equity groups, and then you would have them all cluttered into one particular area, which I always called it a ghettoized area. Not saying that that's not important where they should be, but when you use that to then be able to justify and to say, well, no, we're doing everything with diversity. Here's our high numbers. And when you go and look and see what the numbers are, where they're placed in areas of equity, which is, again, I'm not saying it's wrong. But what does that mean? Does that mean that the door is closed for them to climb up the ladder, maybe to get involved in the finance or other particular areas that does not deal specifically with racial issues? I think there's also the lack of understanding of systemic discrimination and white privilege. And in order to do that, you truly have to go all the way back and look at colonialism, look at slavery, and see what that has brought down through the centuries and the generations in terms of people's outlook for people of color. Because when you talk about, you hear many employers and even government saying that we're making sure that we have gender balance. When you talk about them, well, who's in your gender balance? Do you see women of color? Do you see Black women? And if there is a woman of color, it's not a Black woman. And then you have to also ask, like, what is the comfort level of these Black women or people of color, and particularly Black women, and I'm going to say Indigenous as well, get on these boards? How are they treated? Are they treated with respect? Are they listened to? Are they ignored? These are the questions. So you can talk about diversity, but you need to also talk about diversity and inclusivity Inclusivity means you're totally bringing them into your organization. Your culture is truly accepting them. They are welcomed here. So the challenge is there, and I consider the challenge to be the lack of understanding and acceptance of the impact of slavery and white privilege, and understanding what that means, and the acknowledgement that it is still alive and well. I hope that answers your question.
That was really, really helpful. Thank you very much. I noticed we do have a question from the audience, and I just wanted to share the first question we have here. I am a manager and a member of an employment equity advisory committee with a department within the federal government. I am trying to start a mentorship program for members of employment equity groups, women, Indigenous people, people with disabilities, and visible minorities. And just want to know your thoughts, ideas, and/or your experiences with any such program.
Thank you. That's an important question. And I do believe that organizations who are very, very sincere of wanting to have diversity and inclusivity, and they want to see that that women of color, persons with disability, et cetera, are able to climb the ladder. Even if they don't want to climb the ladder, but they're treated with respect, and they understand very clearly the areas that they're involved in. What you need to do is to make sure that you have the proper people to be their mentors within the organization and external to the organization. You need people that are going to be strong in building the people's confidence, their confidence, and also in the areas of what they need to know and understand about the organization that they're in. You heard me talk about having mentors and godparents. And I did have mentors, and I had mentors who, most of them were external to the organization, but they knew the organization. And then I also had mentorship within the organization. And what that meant for me is that they always made sure they would come into my office and then say, they would give me just like test questions. And that's what they would do. Or they would say, you know what, you answered that well, so you're going to go into that next meeting for the closing, not a meeting, but the closing of a legal matter by yourself. And they said, so anyway, see you later. Call us if you have any trouble. And so you go in, and then as a Black woman, you remember everything they said, and then you say, I'm going to even do it better than what they've even told me. So that's really important. So you need those mentors who clearly trust you, they can be trusted, and they are serious about making sure that you're great. Because sometimes you can have people who want to volunteer to be a mentor, but they're still fearful that you might get to a point even beyond them. Now, when I talked about godparents, there were people that I wasn't even aware of that were watching me and were interested in everything I was doing. And how I found out about them, all of a sudden, my education, to go and learn things about policy to make, and I was often selected with a group of other white people. And I kept thinking, that's really interesting. And then finally I found out who it was. And I never approached the person, but they made sure that I was involved in all the changes, and or I should say understanding, going to university in terms of taking courses on policy making, etc. So these were my godparents, and they were in different organizations. And so I always feel very good about that. And very recently, which is about a couple of months ago, I'm not going to say where, but somebody asked me to do something. And I said, why are you asking me to do that? And the answer was, I've been following you for several years. So there you go.
Wow. Thank you so much for that response. I have another question here, which is quite exciting. This person, I don't know who the question is from, but they say, on Monday, I am assuming an ED role within government. The first Black female ED in my department. Do you have any advice on how to deal with the early days? Great question.
That one's from me, Crystal. It's Natalie Borden. So
Oh, Natalie, congratulations.
thank you very
Thank you for your question.
Congratulations, Natalie.
Thank
That's really good because I have been in such situations. And the first thing that I do, and I think I mentioned that in my speeches, I said, know that department, know it inside out, upside down, everything, and know every single person that's in there, their background, their education, everything. You have to truly, and this is a lot of work, but you have to do it. And then what you need to do is I usually go and visit everybody. I'll go and sit in their office, have a chat. I don't necessarily say, come to my office. I might go in and sit and have a chat with them, because what you're doing is you're trying to find out, understand them, where they're coming from, how are they going to feel in terms of your new role. So these are things that are important. And then at the same time, you have to make sure that you are expecting respect from them and that you are a firm decision maker, but you listen, you're a listener. But you make decisions, and if your decision is going to have positive impacts, then you have to make sure that those decisions are firm. You have to also show that you are somebody who's quite equal in terms how you administer certain things. So that is extremely important. And the big thing that you need is you have to get them to trust you. And you can find that out in many ways of things that you're doing. Honesty with them, having regular not monthly, I always say weekly pull-togethers to chat, to talk, to hear, because if they trust you, they will let you know what things are bothering them or disturbing them. Also, if whatever department is in, does your department have access to people outside? Is it important that what your department is doing may impact external? Have your advisors outside. But one of the things that true advisors do, they never tell you what to do. They may give you examples and analyze things from you, but the final decision is your decision. And the key factors in you is the trust, the honesty, the education, because you need to have answers in everything. And I always look to, my staff used to roll their eyes, but they finally got used to it. I do not have a problem with talking to legal counsel or communications people. I just enjoy talking to them because I think they're the ones that can say, well, if you do it this way, this is going to happen. If you do it that way, this is going to happen. And then they don't tell you what to do either, but they're just giving you the pros and cons. And it's always good to know the pros and cons. That was just me. And I have found that very successful. And I don't know if it's because I had paralegal training that gave me that paranoia that, oh, I better check this and check that. But it always worked. And that's how I felt that I became successful. And I'm going to say it's not going to be 100%. Okay, you're not going to be 100% because no one's 100% except God. But the bottom line is that you can have a very, very great experience if you sort of put some of those things down that I said and have people around that you can ask questions to. But as I said, strong, smart advisors do not tell you what they do. They give you situations, they analyze, and then they say, you have sufficient information here now to make your decision. Hopefully that will help you.
It's great. We're seeing some really, really great questions coming in. Unfortunately, we won't be able to address all of our questions this morning at this point, but we will be compiling all of the information from today's deliberations, and that information will be rolled up into a final report, and that will include questions. But I would like to just ask one last question that's been posed here. And the question is, typically it is stated that non-Black leaders do not recognize our skills and expertise, despite it being evident. Without us being at the decision-making table, how do we change the mindset, perception, or stereotype? Because we are obviously qualified.
And that's such an important question. And that's part of the reason why we're still talking 2020 about having diverse places, and whether or not your question is involving government or private industry is the same. And that to me just tells that there's no seriousness about it. That's the bottom line. But we're at the perfect timing now, especially with God bless his soul, George Floyd's death. And that has added to the pressure of looking at systemic discrimination and accepting that it is real. And look what's happened to our society. Even today, just take a look at what's going on with the fisheries and what's happening to Indigenous people. But you can certainly look at the whole issue of what happened to Indigenous people, colonization, what happened to Black people, go back to slavery and colonization. And people today still refuse to accept the fact that it is real. In those organizations where there are clearly qualified Black people and Black women, and I know that to be a fact, having been around this, and I think that if you have to collectively get together and go and sit and talk to your managers and talk to your directors or somebody who's higher up in the field who can make important decisions, but you have to be unified to do it. It has to be come together. It cannot be one person go in, well, I don't agree with that, and then have the other person say, I'm okay, I'm happy the way I am. It has to be unity. Let me just tell you this. I've had so many mentors when I lived in the United States. And most of my mentors, I have to say, were white males. And many of them were Jewish. And one of the things they would always say to me is, Mayann, at the time my married name was Chambers, Mayann Chambers, you are definitely going to have to make sure that you always stay unified, always be unified. Because if you're not unified, you know what? Divide and divide and conquer is what happens. So if there are issues in particular areas and there's 5 Black people or 10 Black people, you need to come together solidly and have a good meeting, not an angry meeting, and just lay out your concerns. That's what's called honesty. And then if it doesn't travel from there, then there are external organizations that can help you along. Enough's enough. It's 2020. We have to start thinking about the next generation. Do we want the next generations to go through all of this? We don't. And that's what's hard. But I, in anything that I'm doing, I'm always looking at the next generation. I'm all excited about next month. I have a 13-year-old who's going to interview me. I'm excited. I can't wait. Can't wait to hear her questions. 13 years old. That's perfect.
Wow. Thank you so much. Once again, Your Honor, your words are always filled with wisdom, and we so value your perspective and your insight. At this point, we are going to move on to our storytellers. And I think it's important to note that we all have a story, no matter who we are, no matter where we are. Leadership really means many different things to many different people. So we are now honored to hear stories of 4 highly respected and accomplished Black women leaders in our region. So rather than interrupting the flow of the storytellers' voices when they proceed, I would like to share some of their outstanding accomplishments with you before they begin. Yvonne Atwell has engaged in community development and social change, primarily in African Nova Scotian communities for more than 20 years. She was the executive director of the Community Justice Society for 10 years, working in partnership to administer restorative justice programming to youth and adults at risk or in conflict with the law. Yvonne was also the executive director of the African Canadian Employment Clinic and policy advisor and diversity officer for the Maritime Center for Excellence in Women's Health at Dalhousie University. She has also served as a board member with many important organizations. In 1998, Yvonne was selected as the first African Nova Scotian woman to sit in the Nova Scotia House of Assembly, where she served 18 months. She was named honorary member of the Canadian Society of Immigration Consultants in 2007, acknowledging her work as a public interest member of the board. Barbara Manning is an accomplished business leader and entrepreneur. She is a founder of Miller Manning, a consulting firm focusing on business growth and strategy. She is a strong proponent of businesses reinventing themselves by creating innovative business models. Barbara is the past CEO and president of Jeannie Knows Inc., an international online marketing and software development firm, and vice president of Beckfoot Group, an international business consulting firm. Barbara currently serves as Convention Center and a director of the Black Business Consultant Board. She is a past director of the Greater Halifax Partnership, past chairperson of the Black Business Initiative, a past member of Revenue Canada's Small Business Advisory Committee on both the Atlantic and national levels, and a past member of the Nova Scotia Law Foundation. Barbara was the honorary counsel for Barbados in Halifax and a past member of the Women's President Office organization. Sharon Davis-Murdoch is a social justice champion. Retired from the Nova Scotia Public Service, Sharon's political science background and public policy experience informs her work within community. Among her public policy accomplishments was the development of the first provincial guidelines for culturally competent primary health care in Canada. Sharon received the Premier's Award of Excellence in 2007, as well as 2015. In 2018, she received the Inspiration Award from the Dalhousie School of Public Administration. Sharon is a founding member and the co-president of the Health Association of African Canadians. She is also an advisor to the Halifax Immigrant Partnership and secretary of the Dartmouth General Foundation Board. Cora Tolliver is the Regional Director, Atlantic Region, with the Conflict and Complaint Management Services. This work involves promoting and encouraging the use of alternative dispute resolution as the first and preferred mechanism to resolve workplace conflicts. Her leadership provides guidance and supports to members of the defense team toward the effective and efficient management and resolution of all complaints. A graduate of Acadia University, Cora has also completed studies in administrative law through Dalhousie Law School and the conflict management certification through Dalhousie Law School and Henson College. With a certificate in strategic management from York University and a certification in advanced workplace restoration, she brings the practice of a strategic approach to managing conflict from an organizational level to an operational level. With a serve first mindset approach to leadership, Cora has seen some of her biggest obstacles as her greatest opportunity for unlocking potential and purpose in herself and in others. So first, we're going to hear from our speakers, and we will have time for a few questions later. So once again, I want to encourage you to feel free as you're listening to the speakers to jot down your questions in the chat function, and we'll get to them later on. Now it is my delight to turn things over to these exceptional, accomplished, and phenomenal Black women. Please help me in welcoming their voices into our virtual space. Ms. Atwell, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Crystal. Boy, this has been wonderful so far. I look forward to the rest of the day as well. Mayann, your presentation was just very mind-blowing. And it's taken me to several places that I've sort of forgotten about over the years of working with members of the general public. But first, I just wanted to acknowledge the fact that I come from a group of strong women. I grew up in East Preston, and I was born in East Preston. And my grandmother was a midwife, and I tell everybody this. She helped catch babies from many people within the community. She was also loved horses. She raised horses and other people's children too that would come to her, and she'd take them in. And the other thing about my grandmother that I used to be very interested in, and I used to see her sit by her kitchen window and smoke a pipe. I didn't know of any woman that ever did that. But to me, that was kind of different. Like, there's a woman smoking a pipe. She doesn't matter. This is what she does. And she does all these other great things. And we used to go visit her quite often. And especially during strawberry time, we would go and sneak all the strawberries from her backyard. But it was wonderful to know that women did those kinds of things other than, just raise families, which they did. So my grandmother, my mother, many of the women in the community where I grew up was kind of always around us in some form or another. And maybe I noticed because I was usually a very nosy young girl. I wanted to know what was going on inside the house, outside the house. I remember I was telling Mayann at one point that I used to love, I still do, I love to read. And in our house, we didn't have very many things to read. There was the Bible, there was Sears catalog, and then there was a doctor's book, a very large doctor's book with lots of pictures. And I would sneak down to my mother's bedroom and read the catalog, look at the doctor's books, and thumb through the Bible. Didn't really want to read too much of that, but thumb through it. But the foundation, I think, for my life started growing out of the community of East Preston. And so I left school at an early age. I quit school. I was like 17 years old. I didn't enjoy education at that point. I didn't enjoy learning. The schools were very racist, even though that word wasn't around then, but totally ignored in the school system. I would sit in the classroom and basically read comic books, and nobody paid any attention to me. And so I vowed that when I left for Nova Scotia, that I would get a really good job, I would make money, and I would build my life. So very shortly after I got there, of course, I had to go back to school. I really didn't have a choice, but I wanted to at that point. So, I took community courses from the community centers. I took some Dalhousie courses, not Dalhousie, from the university courses at that time, and just kind of worked my way into the system, where I worked for Mount Sinai Hospital, which was a great place to work. Ended up building and learning and growing over the years. I became manager of a Orthodox kosher kitchen, which is kind of unusual. And I also began to work towards working inside of the community to develop my management skills. So at that hospital, of course, I became a manager in the food management area, and I had 4 other supervisors that I managed. And this is probably where a lot of the discrimination started, because these were 4 young white women who I was managing, and I had a large staff as well. So it was very difficult. It was very difficult, but I worked there for almost 20 years, kept growing and learning. You know, I got married there, and, you know, I had my kids there. And so I decided to move back to Nova Scotia, because to me, I always wanted to be home. I went to Toronto for 5 years, but I ended up staying 20. So I wanted to talk a little bit about coming back home, which was really different for me. Because coming back home, I came back expecting that my community would have grown a great deal, and it had not. And this was, I left Nova Scotia in the 60s. I came back in the 80s, and I didn't see a lot of growth. So for me, it was like, how can I get involved in the community to help support that? Because I had more knowledge, and I understood, coming from Toronto in the 60s, where things were kind of rugged in the 60s, that surely the 60s reached Nova Scotia in terms of those little small communities like East Preston and North Preston. So what are some of the things that we're doing? I know there was leadership in the community at that point, but I didn't see a lot with young people. So I got involved with a small group of young people who wanted to look at recreation, wanted to put a ball field in the community, and we started working on some of those issues. Now, a couple of those young women have gone on to be a lawyer. One is a lawyer, the other one has a position in the RCMP. And so I realized that I really liked working with younger people. I liked the way they thought, and I liked the way they were learning, and how they could contribute to community in a different way than I could before I left Nova Scotia. So over a period of time, I became more and more involved in wanting to see the community thrive. So I got involved in politics. Now, I didn't think for one moment that I would ever, be an MLA or anything like that, travel across the province, talking about issues. I never thought for a moment that I would that I could begin to do that. So I talked to people. People started talking to me because they saw the work I was doing in the community. They started talking to me about running for a party, and it was a New Democrat Party. And it took me probably a good year before I made up my mind to do that. So I started learning about the various parties, looking at the party that was most related to basically what was going on in our community, which was not a lot at the time, and how will this party help us do a better job. And then, of course, the riding became the Preston riding, so there was lots of opportunities for Black people to begin to think about how they wanted to engage in that process. And so when we had nomination committees, there was a lot of excitement around the idea that we could have a Black candidate, that we could have somebody that was Black sitting in the legislature. And so there was a lot of excitement around that. So when I won my seat, of course, there we go. You can see what would happen. I was excited. I got involved. It was a time when there was lots of women who ran and won their seats. So there was a lot of support for me inside. One of the things I think that I didn't understand about stepping into politics, and I think Mayann alluded to some of this, that I didn't know a lot about what went on inside. I didn't know a lot about government regulations and policies and procedures. Because you have to remember, when you run and you win your seat, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to know very much at that point, other than the fact that this is something that you have passionate about, something that you can see that could help your community, to move things forward. But inside of the structure, I didn't really understand very much about what was happening inside of that structure. So it took me some time to figure that out. And it was like, I don't really see any Black people here, but yet I need them here. I need support. I need something to show that I know that I'm being supported. Not that anybody treated me anyway. It was just that I need people around me that would understand what was happening to me. So I demanded that I wanted a researcher, a Black researcher, which I got when I was in the House. There was the hiring of administrative support person that helped support the work there. So that was the start of what I was looking at in terms of helping me see things differently. There was other people around. It was the same problem when I was at Dalhousie, at the Atlantic Center of Excellence for Women's Health. I needed people around that I could see, that I trusted, because I know people from my community. I may not have known them personally, but I knew that if they were in that kind of space, then I could trust them. And sometimes that was difficult because people didn't trust us. If there was more than two of us sitting together, whether it was with the party, sitting in a room with more than 2 or 3 Black people, people would be a little suspicious. They would walk by the doors. They wouldn't say anything, but you could feel that it's like, what's going on in there? And I noticed that this has happened all the way through my careers, whether it was in government or private. There was always this feeling that something's going on that the larger community don't know about. You know, we weren't planning to take over anybody. We didn't have any guns in our desks, but it was always this feeling that we were planning something that somebody else didn't know about. So as an MLA, working with people from my community was the best for me, because I could feel that support. I understand what that was about, but that wasn't totally 100%, because there again, people needed to come together. People needed to talk about these issues. And there was an expectation, because I was the first Black MLA who was a woman in the community, somehow I was going to solve all of the problems. Not just the problems in my community, but the problems right across Nova Scotia. Because people would call me looking for advice, wanting to know where they could get funding, all those sorts of things. And so when I did mention at one point, and was taken to task for it by the media, is that we needed more than one Black person representing the communities across the province. You just couldn't have one person representing people from all the way from Cape Breton to Truro. And that was, then I was tagged as, a one-time MLA, that I would never be voted back in because of those thoughts, or because I was public about the fact that one person, we needed more than one person to represent our communities. So as a one-time MLA, which I was really, but that didn't help very much. So I guess what I'm trying to piece together when I started thinking about what I wanted to say today, because there's so much to say, about listening to Dr. Francis, kind of pulled some things together for me in terms of what I did and didn't even know I was doing it. One of the things I always did was to walk with a little book and a pen or a pencil. And I would always record things that were uncomfortable with me, whether it was at a board meeting or in a caucus meeting or sitting with staff, let's say at Dalhousie. I would always make notes, like what was happening that day, if it was uncomfortable, or people challenging me for no reason at all. And I think that that helped me, that when I did make a complaint to the Human Rights Commission, that I won that case handily, because I did everything that I was supposed to do. I knew about the place I was working at at that time. My director was wonderful, the person I worked for, but many of the staff were terrible. They hijacked a lot of my work. And so I ended up leaving and then taking my case to the Human Rights Commission, which I ended up winning. But who wants to live like that all the time and work like that all the time? That is very hard to be able to be always watching your back, in spite of the fact that there were some great, wonderful people around. I mean, they kind of saved the day. And of course, I had a great family who I could go and talk to, lots of brothers and sisters. I'm from a very large family. And to be able to help me through those times. And finally, when I lost my seat, I decided I wasn't going to work again. That I was going to do some other things. So I opened a small business, which I still have today. But I didn't want to be able to go back into that kind of work again. But what happened is I was offered a job at the Community Justice Society as their director. And I thought, okay, they must see something here where they figure that I can do this. So I applied for the job. They just said, apply for the job, see where it goes. I applied for the job. I got the job. And I walked into a situation with the Community Justice Society where I was told by the person who was overseeing the restorative justice program, they said, you were recommended that somebody that may be able to pull this organization together. This is the last kick of the can for the Community Justice Society. We will be pulling our funding if this does not work. So in my whole life, I've never really walked into a place where I thought I couldn't do something, because I believe that you put your heart in it, you put your head in it, you commit yourself to it, you can do it. You just do it, right? No matter what, or don't do it at all. Just walk away from it, leave it. Or if you're gonna walk into it, then you have to walk through it. You can't just take a little bit. You gotta walk through it. So when I started there, the first thing I had to do was to find out what's going on here. What's going on with this organization? This organization was falling apart. Had about 10 staff people. Some of them were part-time, some were full-time, some were doing the job, some weren't. There were a lot of problems from the prior executive director. So what I did take the first several months just to talk to people, talk to the staff, who was there, what the role is, what are you feeling, what are you thinking, all of those things. And then, of course, I had to do an audit of the organization in terms of the people that I could work with or they could work with me. So, of course, I meditated and I prayed on that. And what happened over a period of probably about a year or so, some of the people who were giving me the most difficult just left. I didn't fire them. They just left the organization and we hired new people to move on. And that worked very, very well. And I was there for 13 years. I developed programs within the Prestons community, in Mulberry Park community. I continue to work with organizations in the community and in individuals as well. But in between that, some of the folks wanted to start a union because of the way they were treated by past management. So one of the things, this was a brand new union. Forgive me, because I sometimes go all over the place and I ramble. This was a brand new union. And the reason I'm bringing this up about the Community Justice Society is that I stipulated to the membership and to the union managers that we would have to have a clause in there where they have to hire Black people, African Nova Scotians, to be part of this organization, because we were getting a lot of Black males, particularly in conflict with the law. This meant that they were not going, when you hire people from all communities, they're not going to be the first to leave when things get rough. The first to go. That clause was put right into the union agreement, that we had to have so many that would work with the Community Justice Society. That was a must. and that they were not going to be the first hired and the last hired and the first to be fired. So that was built into that structure. So I was pretty proud of the fact that I don't know if it's still there today, but I know in the last agreement that I negotiated, that was still there. There are many, many issues around being in the public eye, particularly as a first Black woman. I was asked by some people that I thought were like my friends in terms of the feminist movement, the white feminist movement. When I ran as MLA against the leader of the New Democrat Party, which was Robert Chisholm, I realized very quickly that how that worked. The issue of racism that came up in some of the communities that I traveled through Nova Scotia, some of the issues that I had with some of the leadership within the party, and I'm not afraid or ashamed to say this, I'm still a member of the party. I still love the work, you know, but those things had to be dealt with up front. And what would happen when I traveled throughout the province, people would wonder why I wanted to do this. I did not, they would say, well, you don't understand the issues. What makes you so smart? Issues like that would come up. And when I would go to some of my feminist colleagues to say, there's some issues here that are quite racist within some of the leadership of the party, I did not get the support at that point. I did not get the support that I thought I had. So I guess for us, being first is great. It's wonderful. But where is the kind of support, and I don't mean necessarily individual support, where is the support in terms of cultural support for these issues within our own community, for those of us who are out there? That's not always there. What is the kind of support that once you enter that frame, what is there to help you understand what you're going through or what you're going to go through? Just because you get the position, that don't mean you got it. It just means you're put in there. And I say this to young people, and I've talked to a lot of young women, some of them who wanted to run, many of them I did courses with for personal development, personal self-esteem programs, so they could find, employment. And it's like, but what is there inside? Once you're in there, you're going to work there for 5, 10, 15 years and then leave because you are sick, because you don't have the kind of support you need. Where should it come from? Should it come from inside of our community? Should it come from the people who are hiring us? It's more than just giving us a title. It's more than just giving us a job. It's about, don't put all that on one person. Don't believe that I have to be 10 times better than the administrative support person who basically is just taking notes. If I have to be an executive director to run a whole department, what does that look like for me? So going inside government, being first, not enough. You can't always be the first, and you can't sustain that, because like I said, I worked there for, well, it was a little more than the community justice side, for a little more than 13 years, a little more than 10 years. But I could have easily went back to the Human Rights Commission for some of those people I worked with, and in some of those levels. But I dealt with that internally. I had people fired who was my boss. And I would say, take your chances. I can either make this public because I know how I'm being treated, carry my book, carry my pen. That person has to go. And I have had some success, not exclusively, but some success in moving people out of the way. What I say to folks, I don't care if you're racist. I don't care as long as you don't stand in front of me and block me. As long as I don't see you standing in my way, blocking me. You're doing it, maybe, but I want to see you, because I will challenge that. And I know that this is hard for some young people, And this is why with many young people, I say, talk to me, you know, call me if you need some support, especially in politics. And I call those young Black women who are running this year. I called them up. How are you doing? You need any help? You need any support? I can't do a lot. You know, I'm kind of retired now, but hey, if you put the work in, you will get the benefit. But you got to put the work in. It's really important that you do that. And so I guess when I look at sharing and shaping the history for Black women, there's a lot to be done. We're not there, not by a long shot. Not there by a long shot. The idea is, how do we move forward, not just inside of businesses who hire us and then leave us on our own, okay, to take care of the things that we're still learning. Where do we go within our own communities to find that support? And who is supposed to do that? I think we all need some responsibility in terms of helping each other out. But my biggest complaint is when we are put into a situation with a lot of young, smart, well-educated young people. I don't have a university degree. Never really wanted one. I learned what I needed to learn to do what I needed to do. And so I never had that. I never regretted it. Even though I should have had one, but I never did. And I never regretted it because my learning became very, I guess, extensive. You know, I traveled to Africa, I've traveled to the United States. I've done a lot of things that I think that maybe I would not have been able to do to understand the history of my ancestors. So what I want to say to encourage folks who are listening is that be a mentor. And when I say a mentor, sometimes it's just a matter of calling somebody on the phone and saying, how are you doing? You know, you need to talk. Sometimes I call some of my women friends and say, you know, you don't sound right today. What's going on? You need to talk. They always say no. Say, okay. And then before you know it, they're talking. But it's just to know that they can trust and that there's an ear that they can listen to. If you don't have it in the workplace, you have to find it someplace else. And we can't go looking for bad situations. We have to look for positive situations within ourselves and within wherever we're going to work with. To me, it was about self-development. It was learning to trust me first. That if I made a decision, I'll be able to do it. And the good Lord is going to find the people there that will help me as well. So don't be afraid of that. I say, step out, just step out and do it. Feel the fear and do it anyway, because the fear is not really real. But the reality of the situation that you may walk into may prove to be very, very real for you. So if you're not strong inside, if you don't feel that you have enough of that strength, I would say, even when you start your working in your new jobs and the big job, go find that. Go find it. If you find it in your church, fine. But if you don't, go someplace else where you can find that kind of support, that kind of inner strength that lets you know who you are. Who you are. I just think it's a crime for the white large community, not everybody, because I've heard lots of folks there, to think that we have to do more, know more, be more when we come from a society that hasn't allowed us to do that. It's like running a marathon, a marathon of 400 years, and we're just at the starting point. And 400 years has gone by, the marathon's done, and we're still starting. It's not enough. It's not enough for workplaces to say that they're doing diversity, cultural competency, and all that stuff. Not enough. It's on paper. So how do you make people responsible for the things they say they're going to do? How do you make businesses, government, organizations, nonprofit organizations, not much better, to do what they say they're going to do? How do you hold their feet to the fire? For me, you go straight to the top. That's where you start. And mind you, people like to keep money in their pockets. And sometimes it may come right down to that. If you're a racist and you're standing in my way, then you need to pay. And you may have to pay with your own job, losing it. And sometimes I don't think we're strong enough or tough enough to make those kinds of decisions. Nobody is going to do it for us. People can help, people can support, but in the final analysis, it is about us, our communities, and our children and our grandchildren and the next generation. As Dr. Francis had said, the next generation needs better, needs more. So I see what's happening now. I don't know how much time I got left, but I see what's happening now in terms of things are opening in terms of lots of jobs. People want to hire people. Seems like people want to give grants and money and bursaries and all that stuff. But they did that in the 60s. Yeah, so I guess, in the final analysis, we cannot no longer just walk into a workplace given a position, and be careful of the positions that you're given as well, whether they're kind of made up positions or whether they're real, so that you could actually get the work done. It's time that there's more responsibility. If you are going to accept brilliant young people, young women, young men who have been through a depressing situation in the education system, and you're going to put them in a job and give them a title without all the supports, everything they need to succeed. And that is with our own community as well as the organization or that they will be working in. I'm just so impressed with the fact that we have these wonderful people on this panel. I'm happy that I was invited to come. I could tell you stories for days, but we don't have time. So
no, you've been great.
You've
You've been great,
Thank you.
Yvonne. Thank you so, so much. We're going to turn it over to Barbara Manning now and provide her with an opportunity to share her story.
First of all, truly honored to be here this morning. I really don't know how I can even begin to follow Yvonne. That was beyond amazing. And Mayann, as usual, thank you so much for your words. They're always inspiring. I have to start by saying that it was extremely difficult for me to prepare for today. And I was trying to figure out why, and I believe it's because I want to get down to some of the personal feelings that I have felt recently on this journey. And I feel that I'm in a brave space. I no longer believe in safe spaces, but I think today we have a brave space, and I will get to some of those feelings. But I think I've been asked to speak about the effect of systemic racism on my journey. And I just want to begin by saying that systemic racism didn't begin or doesn't begin for any of us when we start our careers. I experienced it a long time before that. And then I had to experience it all over again. For those of us who do have children, we get to go through all of that. So I'm going to try to frame, in spite of all of that, how did I achieve my successes? So I will speak to how I achieved my successes briefly. Then I will briefly speak to what I considered the professional instances of racism that have really affected me over a long period, but it took a long period of time for me to really be able to react to that. And then I'll speak to just a couple of points that for me, it was hitting the wall. In the face of two situations, both happened recently, 2019 fall, I had to stop. And then I'll speak even more briefly to the healing journey, because I'm definitely just beginning that healing journey. And I am somewhat scripted to try to manage my time. So how did I achieve my success? And I do feel that I have had a lot of success. I feel a great sense of accomplishment. I feel that I have come from a place of privilege, and that place of privilege was my community in Sydney, Nova Scotia. Mayann and I both come from Whitney Pier, and it was a place of privilege, not in terms of our being rich, but we were rich in support. And my biggest support came from my father and my mother. They were both trailblazers. My father was an entrepreneur, among many other things. And so from a very early age, long before I had acquired any knowledge to run a business, I was thrown into one. And he allowed you to swim or drown. He would catch you just before the drowning point. But he taught me a number of very true principles that, despite going to university and having an MBA, these were the things that I fell back on when I started my own ventures. And one of them, and I do believe everyone approaches life in their own way. And my father thought it would benefit us if we didn't focus on race. He represented what I would describe as a true diverse community in terms of all ethnic backgrounds living together. And he felt that we should not use our race as an excuse not to be able to achieve. Roll ahead for me, probably 60 years. And although there's a grain of truth in that, it did not prepare me for what I was about to experience when I left the safeguard of Whitney Pier, and indeed, I might say Cape Breton. But what he instilled in me and all of my family, and I do have some powerful women in my family, is hard work. Nothing replaces hard work. Nothing replaces knowing how to build collaboration and relationships and really caring about people. Nothing replaces seeking out the best people when you are building an organization, when you are building a company. And by that, the best people for me is a definition which includes practicing inclusion and then empowering those people. Jeannie knows, which Crystal referred to, was probably the accomplishment that I am most proud of. We took a small research company that was started by my husband, not me. He's a psychologist, but quite a thinker. But he didn't know how to have it make money, so that's when I was brought in. And within a year, we had gone from a company that was below, that was not driving in any revenue. And in Halifax, we became part of an international industry, and we had no clients in Halifax. So within a year, we went from below zero to driving in excess of $1 million in revenues, which was quite incredible, I would say. And we became well known abroad, but not really here in Halifax. We caught the eye of Nova Scotia Business Inc. and probably a call at that time. And Nova Scotia Business Inc. decided that we would become, Jeannie knows, the poster child for attracting other businesses in our field to come to Nova Scotia to set up their businesses. And so they had a video done of our company. And when I looked at the video, I was kind of surprised and I was so pleased because we had a complete mix of gender. We had probably every ethnic group present in Nova Scotia, given that most of our staff came out of the computer university department, at Dalhousie University. I can't think of one group that was not represented. And it was a staff of 40, but that happened organically. We didn't sit down and decide we were going to balance and make sure we had enough females in our research department. We hired the best candidates for the positions. But I have to say that young people understood, it was clear that it didn't matter what your ethnic background was. If you were Black, if you were Asian, if you were from the Eastern countries, if you were from India, they all knew if they put their best foot forward, first of all, they had access. And secondly, if they put their best foot forward, they would be hired. And that's very important for what's going to come hopefully later on in my talk. And that in part will lead me to where I go on my healing journey, because for all of us, the healing part of what we're going through can only be one thing. And that is what I call the future of inclusion. But with all of my ventures, and I had a few, at first I experienced relative success and relative and increased failure. With each failure, you learn and you move on to the next success. But I continuously remembered the teachings of my father. I continuously remembered that, as Yvonne said, Mayann said, education in terms of knowing your business or your industry has to be paramount. But I have to also say that I never felt that I had to be better than anyone else in my particular industry because of who I was. It was just, that was the way I was brought up to be. So the difficult part then today was for me to say, and I have to say that, I don't believe that systemic racism had a major, if any, influence on my role as an entrepreneur. I had access to funding. I had access to government supports. I had access to initial markets through the government. I had access to large research funding. And because of all of that, and I know that that's not the case for everyone, because I was a part of the early formation of the Black Business Initiative. But today I'm speaking from my perspective of my story. I had many challenges, and I would honestly say that they were challenges that any entrepreneur experiences and that I'm experiencing today and will experience in every venture that I take on. So, with that being said, where did the suffocation and actual silencing that's brought about by racism come into my life? I would say it came when I ventured outside of this cocoon or the world that I was taught to create for myself. And I had no training as to how to cope with that. As Yvonne said, we have to build a support system. I had no support system. And I say there are moments that change our lives. And as much as it pains us, because they are usually the painful moments, we are present in those moments for a reason. And I would say I've experienced a fair amount of pain to come to that statement. So my first experience of being on a board, because it was one of my greatest joys, and it was one of my greatest points of pain. But my first experience was with that of the Black Business Initiative. It was wonderful. I cannot say it any other way. To be invited to be at a table where, for the first time in my life, everyone looked like me. And we had one perspective, and that was to increase the visibility, increase Black businesses in Nova Scotia. I thoroughly enjoyed being a part of that voice. Excuse me, I knew that I was totally supported there. So much so that when they started, as is the case, I think a lot of Black people know that it's not uncommon for boards around the city, around the province, to want to have one person on that board so they can say they have representation. And at the time, I don't think he would mind my using his name, Hector Jake was on so many boards, he felt it was time for some fresh air. And I was 30 years younger then, so I guess I was the fresh air. And based on the experiences that I had just had with the Black Business Initiative, I was excited. I thought, well, this is going to be great. I'm going to be able to add my voice, contribute, and continue what I had then thought would become a meaningful part of my contribution. Needless to say, the interaction was not the same. And I don't think I know I've never spoken about this in this way. But over those years, I'd become insensitive to the numerous instances of board members, not staff, but board members, treating me as if I were invisible, both in and out of the boardroom. If you allow, I'm going to indulge in some personal feelings because I don't know how else to express this. Often seeing me outside of the boardroom and actually running, and on one occasion, I smile because this person could have been hit by a car, jumped into the street to avoid having merely to say hello. Seeing me at other professional settings, other professional meetings, and acting as if we had never met. And if I would go to say hello, they would find some way to move away quickly. Over a period of time, that has one effect. It's much like the ocean wearing down a stone. And I had nowhere to turn as to how do I deal with this. As a result, I very often found myself taking a really deep breath outside of the boardroom before I would enter, but telling myself I have to enter so that others may enter. Always seeing yourself as making way for the next generation. But in reality, are you making way if over the course of 20 some years, this is continuous and nothing is changing? And I'm not saying that there were not good, nice, outreaching people on those boards. But I would say there were enough that were not, that I ended up, I spoke to, my husband is a psychologist, and very often I would be using his services before I would have to attend a board meeting. So that leads me to a defining moment that I think really changed my life and gave me the courage to be speaking with you today, because it is taking that from me. In the fall of 2019, I'm in a boardroom once again, and the milestones of the Nova Scotia or the Ray Ivany report are being communicated. All of the milestones are either close to target, on target, and in some cases are exceeding the target, but for one. Milestone, which referred to Black and Indigenous people in terms of increasing employment, is now not only below the target, but it's below the number when the report was written 5 years earlier. Again, I'm the only Black person at the table, and suddenly I can't breathe. I feel that right now. At that moment, I felt all of those years of putting myself in a situation where I felt I would help to bring about change was completely wasted. It may not be true, but that is how I felt. Then I thought of all the bright, professional young people in this province. And I thought, how can that be the case? I thought of my children, my daughters, and how they both had experienced racism when looking for work outside of our family. And then I thought, as Crystal, you've heard this story of my second daughter, who completed a Bachelor of Science at Dalhousie, then completed an architecture degree, which she almost could not complete, despite being first in her class. She won the Shaw Award that year, or for her year. But she almost couldn't graduate. There was not one firm in Halifax that would allow her to do her co-op or work term, which was a prerequisite for graduation, so that her professors, after being completely astounded, had to come together and put a work program together for their then best student so that she could graduate. In her class, there were 3 to 5 Black students. The remainder were from the West Indies, and they all had to return home so that they could graduate. In that moment, it brought back the overt racism that I had experienced at the hands of an executive recruiter, that my white, 6'5", and this is significant, British son-in-law, he knows what that accent does around here, had referred me to. He had met with him and thought he was amazing, and he thought that he would be overjoyed to meet with me and pleased to represent me, because I, in fact, had been my son-in-law's boss. By that time, my software company had closed, and I thought I would venture into the corporate world. I arrived early, as I would. As you know, I did this morning. And I arrived in the reception area. And when the receptionist came to me, I expected she was going to take me into the recruiter's office. But instead, she took me to, I can't call it a cubicle. I can't call it a closet because I don't know of any closet that was that small. I can compare it to maybe 2/3 the size of what a UK phone booth. So we all know how small the old phone booths were, except it wasn't glass, it was a closet, half a closet. And she put me in there and closed the door. And I was supposed to wait there. I still don't know to this day, because that was only in 2014. I was well over 65. I don't know why I stayed there. Only I guess I was so shocked and I couldn't understand what was happening. So when I was finally taken to the recruiter, and I think I was in that room at least 15 minutes, or that, whatever it was, it felt to me like a holding cell. And I would be really interested to know what its purpose is and who they commonly put in there. And I introduced myself and he said, "No, you don't have to introduce yourself. You're famous. I know you." And I said, "Well, I didn't know I was famous." And from that moment on, the conversation by him focused on race and race alone. Every time I tried to bring the conversation back to the purpose that I was there for, to be represented for, and keep in mind, he only was a recruiter for top executive jobs. We never got there. In 30 minutes, we did not go there. But he did end the conversation by saying, for those of you who don't know, I have an extensive educational background. I've traveled the world. I've had quite a few achievements. And his remark was that I should consider being retrained. He didn't say what that would be, but that he would not be able to represent me because of, he did not say because of race, but his earlier conversations left me there. And that was the end. I can't ever remember that feeling. And when I came home and spoke with my family, with my son-in-law, especially, he couldn't get his head around it, despite the fact that we were trying to explain what systemic racism is. So after hearing those stats, all of this came back, and I began to wonder how many other Black executives who are not in public life, who are not in the government, have had similar experiences. And for me, that meant access denied. If you are not represented, you don't know. Crystal, you asked in a meeting, how do we know about those positions? You don't know about them if you can't get access. Second defining moment. After that board meeting, I find myself at a Black business strategy meeting where a panel of all white presenters are giving presentations around diversity. First, I'm shocked because when is this going to stop? And then secondly, I thought, no, I have to speak out here. I cannot remain silent. And why can't I speak out there? This, at least I'm in a safe environment, or so I thought. Quite the contrary. According to many, I had spoken out of turn. I said some of the same things I said today, plus I added that the definition of diversity is not filling jobs that were previously held by by white men with white women. That was taboo, I found, by both sides. I was told that I had spoken out of turn and that I was not following the rules. Of course, this was all in 2019. It was all before Black Lives Matter. And so I spent those months being tortured, really, as to how to move forward. Where were my supports? Now I had no supports. But I made a decision that I would remove myself from boardrooms where I was not making an impact solely because I had lost my voice. And so therefore, I was fulfilling what they thought about Black people to begin with. That's how I felt. So time rolls forward, and who knows? I certainly didn't know Black lives were going to matter in such a big way publicly, but there it is. Black lives matter. And then all of a sudden, I can even give myself, and this is the worst part, that you have to give yourself permission to not feel guilty about not having crossed those rules, because by crossing the rules, you are making it difficult for the next Black person to be what? That's the question. So, do I have a solution today? No, I certainly do not. But what I will say, I've taken, for me, the solution was a pause, a withdrawal. And some may say you have to keep going forward. Sometimes you have to retreat just to refocus and to try to regain some resilience, because you do get beaten down. Is there a light at the end of this tunnel? I hope so. Within a month, and I'm not crediting anything to me, it's coincidence. Within a month, 2 significant positions of leadership in Nova Scotia were filled by prominent Black women. And this too happened before Black Lives Matter. So I thought, well, systems don't change. If we're trying to change systems, forget it. People change systems. Systems will never change. Systems are put in place for those who have held the power, and people don't give up power. They'll find other ways that they can allow you. And in fact, we're not asking for them to give up power. We're asking for them to share the power. So I keep saying over and over, are we there yet? And I say no, but the journey has begun for me and for everyone worldwide. So for me, I can't leave you with any huge words of wisdom, but I know that what I've done is I have fallen back on what has worked for me. And that is one of the things we are doing, my husband and I. We are currently expanding and repositioning his practice because mental health has become even more important to Black people now. He has a deluge of people who have experienced such racism in their careers over the years. This is not new, but now they feel the freedom to come forward. So we are actively expanding the practice to address mental issues caused by racism, but with a difference. We're reaching out to young, and I will use a term, BIPOC, because that's what we're doing, professionals, to join our practice. For me, I'm in the midst of forming a new company that is focused primarily on building teams of young, and I say BIPOC, business professionals to enter the corporate world at a different level and make a difference. I will need a lot of support. So if there's anyone listening today who can help, I welcome it. Does that mean that we're there yet? No. But I've reached out and I found a healing source to allow me to continue. Quite recently, I attended a webinar of 100 leaders from around the world. And they spoke about the new leadership playbook and the decline in trust. And I think that's part and parcel of what we're speaking to today, that there has been a major decline in trust as it refers to Black people, whether in the justice divisions or whether it is allowing access, whether it is recognizing the well of potential in our Black young people. And one of the 3 days of that webinar, luckily for me, I had no idea ahead of time, was spent on the future of inclusion. And if you ever have a chance to listen to Oshoki, I hope I'm saying it correctly, Oshoki Abalu, she's an American Nigerian entrepreneur. It will be totally uplifting if you, like me, were floundering and didn't know where to go. She spoke of the future of inclusion and our unprecedented opportunity to create a whole new story of human connection, one of unity and oneness together, because I agree with her, it's our only way forward. She says we are certainly not there yet, but we can be the beginning of telling a different story in order to replace a failed story. And I say being angry is exhausting. And I can't remember being angry as I have been for the better part of a year, so I look at today as an opportunity for all of us and for those of you who are listening to amplify our voices, create brave spaces. Don't worry about safe spaces. There are no safe spaces. You speak your truth and you accept that it will not be accepted by everyone. There will be fallout. But as Yvonne said, we have to get strong. We have to become resilient. And that's what I'm working towards. But build these brave spaces where we can struggle together. I think that is the way forward. I feel today that this is a brave space. And I know from our brief discussion, I think on Wednesday with Sherry, you may not know it, but for each of the storytellers, it's taking an immense amount of courage for us to speak today. We're not speaking in our official or professional tones. And since I don't know how to close this, I will close it using the words of Nelson Mandela. Mm-hmm. He says, "Do not judge me by my successes. Judge me by how many times I fell down and got back up again." Thank you.
Wow, Barbara, thank you so much. I really appreciate really powerful remarks from both you and Yvonne, and we really appreciate. I am very sensitive to the time, and I realize that folks have not had a break, and I'm getting a feeling that folks might be ready to take a break a little earlier than what had been planned. So our next two speakers have agreed to wait and allow us to take a 15-minute break. Now it's about 10 after. So if we could come back at 25 after 12 sharp, we will resume with Sharon Davis-Murdoch and Cora Tolliver to have them speak. And then we'll spend a little bit of time with a few questions that you might have for our storytellers. And then we'll move into our breakouts to allow the broader audience to offer some insights into this discussion. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you all at 25 after 12. You know, we've asked our storytellers to show up here today to share their personal in particular to really go into their hearts and soul. And they've been doing that wonderfully. And this is not always an easy task. It does take great courage. And I do appreciate the truth, the honesty, the vulnerability that we've seen thus far from both Yvonne and Barbara. And I know Cora and Sharon are going to also be open and honest and come with courage as well. So I just want to acknowledge that and let folks know that while we're running behind schedule, I'm not too concerned about that. I think that there's more value in allowing this process to unfold organically as we are. And I would just ask that folks stick with us. And if your schedule permits to hang around a little later, we do appreciate that. And once again, if you do have to leave us at 1:15, please feel free to do so and understand that we are recording the deliberations and there will be a report that will follow at a later date. So whatever you do miss, you will be able to pick up with that information later on. So I am going to now call upon Sharon Davis-Murdoch, if you don't mind, Sharon, to begin to share your story with us. So I'll turn the floor over to you, and then we'll go directly and hear from Cora. Okay, thank you, Sharon.
Thank you. Thanks. So I want to say hello to everyone. I know that there are many, many of my friends and colleagues out there, and I certainly want to thank the Mount St. Vincent University, the Atlantic School of Theology, RBC as well, and particularly Her Honor, Crystal and Sherry. And I absolutely want to say congratulations, Natalie Borden. I know your story, and I want to say congratulations to you today. This is, it is quite an opportunity, and it is also quite challenging to share your own personal story, to reflect in ways perhaps that are letting people in to very personal and also vulnerable making situations. I think I want to say, though, that that I'm hoping that at the end of this and this little journey you take with me, that you are feeling stronger, because that is what we need to do for each other. So to begin at the beginning, I'd like to define myself as a number of things. I was born in the East End of England, London. I'm an East Ender from that perspective. I was raised in the West End of Bermuda. I now live uptown, down east. That's the way I like to think of myself. I've been a migrant, not because I've chosen to be, but because life has made me that way. I have migrated from one to another to another. And so it is what, that's the way it has been. So I would like to share, I guess, I'd like to think about the way that I'm going to speak today in terms of chapters of a book. And I'm also going to share, or at least very briefly, share books with you, because books are very important in my life, and that's just the way that I see that this makes sense. So I'm going to share, first of all, the chapter of pivotal moments in my life, the chapter on life-changing advice, the chapter on managing the fire in my belly, and the chapter of the freedom to make good trouble. So starting at the beginning with my pivotal moments. Picture circa 1964, Somerset, Bermuda, hot, humid, and hot in terms of the movement of integration or the beginning of integration of some things, not others, in this little island, which is still a colony of Britain and not too far away from Nova Scotia. Picture yours truly, little Black girl, going into what had previously been an all-white school, called Sandy's Grammar School. Now, I know it's not all white now, but it was then. And you might wonder, why is that the case? Well, I come from a political family, and I come from a justice-seeking family. And I'll tell you a bit more about that later. But this little girl walked into this school, and it was extraordinarily intimidating. I remember that the Bermuda sun didn't even seem to be shining right at that moment. And as I went into school and I looked around and there was nobody else but me, and I knew, actually, I just knew it even at 5 years old, that I was likely to be the only one in the school. And so we went through the motions of the first day of school. You know, I think about that in Nova Scotia and what it looks like these days when, you know, the parents are there and the pictures are being taken and so on and so forth. It wasn't quite like that for me. So I went into school and, you know, there were, the people were barely polite, and Bermuda is a very polite place, polite being the operative word. So I was, you know, I was allowed in and shown, you know, what kids are shown, where to sit, where you put your things and so on. And then sort of sat there and went through the first, you know, hour or so. And then we went to recess. And I walked out into this little courtyard that they had at the school. And I was a child who loved dolls, always have, loved baby dolls, loved babies, loved dolls. And there was a circle of little white girls with a white doll. And the white doll was just absolutely gorgeous. It was just so pretty and dressed, you know, beautifully. And I was immediately just so excited to see a doll like that and to want to join in the conversation about how pretty this doll was. And I walked up to the circle of children, they were little girls, all of them. And I said, "Oh, that doll is gorgeous. Can I see your doll?" And I reached out and she looked at me, this little girl who had the doll, and she said, "Take your Negro," she didn't say Negro, "hands off my doll." That was the first day of school. That was the early awakening. Now, was I aware that there was a struggle? Absolutely, because I come from a political family. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was the first Black woman, the first woman to attend Edinburgh University Medical School. And she was married to Dr. E.F. Gordon, who is considered, though he was a physician and had come from Trinidad to Bermuda, he is considered the person who led Bermuda's working class. He is considered the hero of Bermuda's working class. And to this day, those who travel to Bermuda, if you go to the King Edward Hospital, Memorial Hospital, you will find that there is a wing named after my grandfather, my maternal grandfather. And there's a book here that says, "Thank you, Dr. E.F. Gordon, the hero of Bermuda's working class, but yet a physician." And he and my grandmother were the first at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. So migrants, you see the story, how it's unfolding. And then though I was aware of the struggle, I had not articulated the struggle. I had not taken on the work of the struggle. At 5 years old, it would be hard to do that. But I remember the assassination of JFK. It was in my body. I could feel it. And in 1968, my beautiful mother, some of you know her, she has left us. She has left us for dwelling in, I like to think, in heaven. But my mother, a strong, proud, capable, and absolutely politically established Black woman, established in her spirit. She took me to the memorial service for Dr. Martin Luther King in Bermuda at the AME, that is African Methodist Episcopalian Church on Court Street in Bermuda. Some of you may know that area. And I sat at that memorial service and I heard the speeches, or I would say basically the preaching of an AME preacher. And I heard the call and response, because I just want to peripherally say that my family, and I still am Catholic, practicing Catholic. That doesn't mean that I agree with everything about the Catholic Church and its teachings, but I believe in essential things, and I believe in justice, which I also take from my faith and from many aspects of my upbringing. But on this day, I was at the AME Church in Bermuda, and I heard the sounds of people singing and the call and response when the preacher was preaching and people were saying, yes, that's right, yes, because they could feel the injustice that had happened to our people in that moment. And I saw, and it's hard not to get emotional, I saw for the first time Black men cry at the injustice, at the relentless struggle of our people. And at 9 years old, I became a social justice champion, because I knew from there that there was something in me that had to seek justice, that had to walk the talk in however I could. A little kid in a school where I was the only one at the beginning, and then I moved to Manson Agnes Academy, consistent with that Catholic upbringing. I was allowed in because, believe it or not, even for Catholic schools, there was segregation. But eventually I was allowed in. And through that process, I would be the only one, one of maybe 2 or 3 Black kids in the class. And the Vietnam War was going on and injustice was happening, and Black men were being sent to fight in a war where when they would come home, there was no justice for them. And I was aware of that, just a little kid. And I would stand up and speak my truth into the classroom. And the white kids would just not want to hear that. They'd roll their eyes. The teacher would look terribly uncomfortable. Sometimes it was a nun, sometimes it wasn't. But they didn't really want to hear about that kind of stuff, and they didn't understand what I was doing there talking about it. But I couldn't help myself, because that was my reality, was living in an unjust society. And my people, though most of them were not in my school, were the recipients of this. So I am a child of the civil rights movement. I understand it to the core, what it feels like and to experience it. So I'm going to fast forward then to when I was receiving my, after I received my master's in political science at Dalhousie. Those university years were interesting. I can't certainly spend too much time talking about that. So I'm going to say that after I graduated, after I had that MA, I had met my husband, who was not unlike myself. You know, he was a medical student from Antigua, and we both decided that we were going to stay in Nova Scotia. It was going to be our home, and he couldn't get work. He was an immigrant, and there were no places for doctors who were immigrants, except, you know, in the most remote areas of Nova Scotia where no other Canadian, mostly white, doctors would want to be. So we spent 3 years in Freeport, Nova Scotia, and I love that time. But I needed to get, you know, I needed to get back to a place where I could use my master's degree, and I wanted to be a public servant. I wanted to work in public service. That aligned with who I was and with my justice seeking persona, if you like. So got that MA, was so proud that I was now going to be able to put it to work. I was going to be able to have a career, and I was going to be able to excel because I was interested in doing hard work. I applied at that time, which was 1988. I applied to 100 positions in this province, and I was granted 70 interviews because on paper, my resume said Sharon Davis-Murdoch. Davis and Murdoch are not Black names. They are names that people would assume were from Welsh and Scottish people, right? So on the face of it, I was absolutely qualified to be interviewed. 70 interviews later, turned down for every job. I know that I was able to do the work in any of those positions. I know that I gave good interviews. I know that there wouldn't be too much about any of those positions that I couldn't have handled. And yet, rejection after rejection after rejection, I couldn't understand. What did it take? What did it take to break through? What did it take to be given a chance to prove myself? And you know, I'm moving now to my chapter of life-changing advice. And this is where her honor comes in. Now, she may not be expecting this, but I will share with you that because I had a passion for justice and I needed to understand what this systemic racism was capable of doing. Why was it so difficult? What did it take? I sought her out because she was in employment equity at Dalhousie. I sought her out and she agreed to see me. And I went to see her and she said, let me look at this resume. And she did. And she certainly did point out that, you know, I think that's the time when I began to understand that you need 50 resumes. If you're going to apply for 50 jobs, you need 50 resumes. One size does not fit all on a resume. So she helped me understand that. And she also heard me. And she also shook her head in understanding when I explained how frustrated I was and how this was unfairness that I just didn't get. I thought even being from a background in civil rights or as a child raised in this area, that if you tried hard enough, you'd be able to get over, you'd be able to do it. And she understood that frustration. I left her office and I thought, well, you know, at least she was nice to me and she heard me and maybe she could help me after that structural racism that I had experienced in my face with all those 70 interviews and the aftermath of them. And indeed, to my delight, to my excited, experience, she called me and she said to me, her honor called me and said to me, look, there's a position. I think that you could do it. Here's what you ought to do. And basically what she was letting me know is that she had given my name as someone who ought to be considered. And that is the moment that I understood the power of the godparenting she speaks of. She is my godparent. Thank you. Thank you, Her Honor. Thank you. And indeed, she opened the door, for which I am eternally grateful. Now, going through the door, my experiences are very similar to the experiences of my sisters, of Yvonne, of Barbara, right? Her Honor explained many things that I have absolutely related to. But when I think about my life-changing advice, in addition to what she provided for me, there was a white man, young white man, actually, who was my director. And I thought that this young man was extraordinary. And he is, to this day, a public servant. I have permission from him to tell you that he said to me, at that point, I was a researcher in a political situation. I was a political staffer. And he said to me, Sharon, my best advice that I've taken myself that I'm going to give to you is do something that no one has ever done. Do it with excellence, but make sure that they know that you're doing it. And I pass that on to many, many people that I mentor, many young people I come in contact with, because it is the best advice that I have ever received in terms of my professional moving forward as a policy person. And I can tell you that when I finally was able to move from as a political staffer into the public service, and I believe in a non-partisan public service, I am capable, as we all are, of doing that. But when I moved into policy, there wasn't anybody who looked like me that I ever came in contact with. So that policy road was a very lonely road. And I suppose that I learned then, and that's when I'm going to move into my chapter of managing the fire in my belly, how to be a public servant and to be a social justice champion at the same time. And that isn't easy. That isn't easy. So what I want to tell you is that the passion and the fire in my belly for social justice that I learned and that I experienced when I was 9 years old has been with me ever since. And it didn't leave when I entered my policy career. So I tried to learn all I could, as the women who have advised you today have said. I learned about the Nova Scotia health system, the Canadian health system. I learned as a political staffer about the Nova Scotia political system. I learned about the rules of bureaucracy. I knew the Public Service Act. I knew those things because it was necessary for me to have that information, have that knowledge to be able to navigate my work. And so I was able to do that. I was able to move, to learn, and I took in all that I could, all the while feeling oftentimes extraordinarily angry, extraordinarily sad about the injustice that still continues with us. But you have to put yourself into a place where you are disciplined enough to learn what you need to learn, smart enough to know when to act and when not to act. And what I often tell people is, do not be risk averse. You mustn't be afraid to take risks, but you should be, if you're a Black person, you should be risk certain. You ought to know that if you take this risk, that will happen. So think it out, be smart about it. And so I was not risk averse, but I sure was risk certain. The circumstances had to be right, the opportunity had to be right, and the people that I reported to had to be the right people in order for me to move to the next level. And so, by the grace of God, those things did happen. And I saw that we were going through in the health system yet another iteration of health policy change. We were going to change the system one way, and then we were going to change it another way, and we were going to put emphasis on primary health care, and we were going to move away from tertiary care as being the only area of importance, and so on and so on. And so in that movement toward healthcare reform, I looked at the system and I said, yeah, healthcare reform, but in no place here are we dealing with the needs of people of African descent or people who are marginalized, period. Across the diversity, marginalized people were not identified as being important in that revolution or in that, reform, never revolution. And so I said, it's time. So I proposed to someone I respected, because remember, I looked at my surroundings and I was disciplined enough to wait until things were right and that I had acquired the knowledge I needed to acquire to put forward a proposal. And my proposal was for the Diversity and Social Inclusion Initiative in primary health care. And it is through that process that work was done, and it wasn't easy. Now, I told you I was going to show you a couple of books in this time. And I want to share with you today this book that just came out on October the 13th. And it's called How Government Really Works. And indeed, my colleagues, Jane Alt and Angela Poirier, have put this book out, and they interviewed yours truly. And I'm in here, I'm in this book. And I want to read from it just briefly to let you know that what I'm saying has been said before, and to share this with you. Clear to all public servants is that we are there to serve and do what we are asked to do. Those at the policy level work on files they're asked to work on. We are assigned things. Seldom, if ever, are we given the opportunity to come up with our own work. It wasn't easy. I proposed this to senior leadership, and I was delighted when someone said, you know, you make a good point. That makes sense. You can do that piece. There was a lot of pushback around the concern, and this is something that has happened across my career, that there was too much emphasis on race. Well, the fact is that there had never been any emphasis on race prior to this. And to talk about race at all was problematic, it seemed to me, for some people. And it still is. I remember in my the last years before I retired from government, I would be in rooms where the mere mention of systemic racism would bring in such tremendous stress and pushback into the room. People's bodies would change. People's facial expressions would get very tight. And I would be challenged when I mentioned systemic racism. And I would be told, you know, that's like saying we're all racist. And I said, no, you know, absolutely, that is not what it means. What it means is that we live in a system that is systemically racist, and it impacts every one of us. You don't have a choice. It affects you. It affects you if you're white. It affects you if you're Black. It affects you if you're brown. It affects you whatever shade of the rainbow you might be. It affects you because systemic racism is just that. It is systems that are completely infused with the notion of white supremacy, whether it's the health system, the education system, the justice system, it's there. And it's structures that have been there for generations. So how can we not be impacted? But boy, that is not a lesson or not information that people are terribly willing to receive. And, you know, when they say we are now in a Black Lives Matter movement, I want to tell them, hello, Black lives have always mattered. Black lives mattered before I was born. Black lives mattered when my grandparents were at the University of Edinburgh and trying to get an education, where trying to walk down a road that had never been walked before. No, no, no. It's not that Black lives matter now. It's that the rest of the world has agreed that we have been unjustly treated for our history. And it is a time that they are awakened to the need for reckoning for that. But enough said on that. So I guess what I would like to impart is that I took the long view. I had to learn, I had to be disciplined, I had to manage the fire in my belly, because it was always there, and it always will be there. I managed the fire in my belly because I understood that you have to take the long view. You have to take the long view. Short-term flavor of the month, that is not change that lasts. In the words of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, that icon of the United States Supreme Court and of women everywhere, she was a champion and she was an ally. She was an ally to Black people. She understood, and she said, real change comes about one step at a time. So my advice to you, sisters, is to understand that that is so. And you must see the future. You must be intentional about reaching where you want to go. You must be disciplined. And yes, you need allies as well as you go. You need godparents like Her Honor. You need to be supportive of one another. Finally, I want to talk about the freedom to make good trouble. When I left the public service, many of my friends and allies know, it was heart-wrenching. I didn't have to retire at that time. I was eligible to retire, but I didn't have to retire. A lot of things were coming together. And I had worked very hard in the position that I had. It was the only one of its kind in government at that point. And there was no place to go. I had hit the glass ceiling because at that point, Black lives mattered less. And the opportunity for upward mobility for someone like myself was so limited that when I looked across government, I didn't see a place for myself. And indeed, with the reform, another reform of the Nova Scotia health system, that meant that many people were going from the Department of Health and Wellness into the Nova Scotia health system, into the Nova Scotia health organization, the governors of the system. Well, that's all fine and good, but I was a public servant, and that's what I wanted to be. I didn't want to leave to go into the Nova Scotia health structure. So I thought, okay, because I too am a person, I'm a woman of faith. And I thought, okay, I get it. This is the time for transition for me. And yet I knew, and anyone who knows me knew, that it wasn't going to be the end of my work. So indeed, I moved into a new place, the place with the freedom to make good trouble. I had paid my dues, done my time, been disciplined, and I still have to be disciplined because that never ever goes away. You have to know what you're talking about, and you have to say it in a timely way and in a way that is effective. So indeed, that is always going to be. But this is now a voice that is not restrained by a paycheck, not restrained by an act of government, but rather a voice that can speak its truth in ways that it couldn't before. And I love this time to make good trouble. And so I want to say to you that there are lots of things to look forward to in your lives, lots and lots of things. If you're just starting out, you can do great things and you can be who you want to be smart about it. And I have a few tips. The first thing I want to do is to show you one more book, and that is, if you're a Black woman in government or a Black woman, period, read the book called White Fragility, because it will provide you with information that will allow you to understand, to put yourself in the place of very many people who make decisions about your life. It's hard for white people to talk about racism. It's hard for anybody to talk about racism, but when you are in a position of power, it is absolutely difficult to talk about this. And it strikes me too, and I'm really happy to have the opportunity to say this. We don't have to fight over oppression. Your oppression is your oppression, and I see it. I'm a social justice champion. I see oppression here and there. I don't have to only see it in myself. We don't need to fight about oppression. But because my people get justice, it doesn't take anything away from your people. As Barbara said, it's not about taking power, it's about sharing power. And that's what I look forward to. That's the thing we have to get to. So my parting advice to you, I have 4 points. First of all, be kind. Be kind to one another, right? And be kind to your allies, because the same people, I know you've heard this in a song, the same people you see going up are the same people you're going to see coming down. That's not why you do it. You do it because you have an inherently good and decent sense of what is right and what is wrong. But be kind to people and to one another. 2, strive for balance. It can't be all work and no play. It can't be all work and no relaxation. It can't be a life that is joyless and plodding, because you can't make it. You can't make it to the end in a life like that. So strive for balance. Work hard, relax well, enjoy your family, enjoy your friends and your allies, and love your community. Give back. Number 3, do not ruminate. I have spent too many hours sitting around worrying and wondering about whether I said the right thing and whether or not someone took offense and whether or not I made the right move. You know what? If you prepare well and you do your best, whatever happens, let it go. Move on. Life is too short and it's going to do you no good. And as a person who cares very much about our people's health, it is unhealthy to ruminate. So let that stuff go and move forward. And fourthly, but most importantly, as Her Honor has shown me in my life, always lift as you climb. In the words of Bell Hook, always lift as you climb. Thank you. Thank you so much for your attention. And, I feel a great deal of love for all of you at this moment and always. And I will continue to make good trouble, and I hope I'll see you while I'm doing it. Thanks again. Over to you, Crystal.
Over to Cora.
Oh,
Okay.
over to Cora.
Over to me. I'd just like to say thank you to Her Honor for her vision and fortitude to have this forum today. And thank you to everybody else who supported and enabled today. And so I just want to say I'm really excited to have this conversation, and I'm honored to be part of it and to sit here today and hear all the stories and the journeys of the other Black women is so empowering and encouraging. And I'm inspired by it. I'm inspired because they have trailblazed before me. And so I'm still in the mix and I'm still doing it. But before I begin, I just want to tell you a brief story. I grew up in a small town in Windsor, Nova Scotia, not far from Halifax, of course. And grew up in a family, there's 6 of us. And I say 6 of us, that's my mom and dad and 2 sisters and a brother. And of course, in a small town in Windsor, race is something that was evident. It was evident on a daily basis. And so I want to tell you the story because I think that as adults, sometimes there's things that happen in our life and there's stories for some reason that later on we remember and we're saying, why am I remembering this story? Well, I think every story has purpose and that's why we remember it. So on this particular day, I was on a shopping trip with my mother. And my mother's no longer with me. She passed away in 2012, but she was a person who was such an activist in the community and very direct in her communication. And so she instilled that in all of myself and my siblings. And so on this particular day, we were shopping and we arrived at the little store, and out in front of the store was this big mountain of sand. And I wanted to play on this mountain of sand. I didn't want to go in the store. I mean, that was boring. So I said, could I play in this mountain of sand? And she said, yeah, you can play in the mountain of sand. So I started to run up and down this large mountain of sand. And on the mountain of sand was another little girl. And we were playing there together. We never really spoke. We were laughing at the same things. I mean, you know, when you're 7, you find joy in the simplest of things. To this day, I'm like, I don't know why this mountain of sand was that exciting. But anyway, so we continued to run up and down this mountain of sand, laughing, sharing the same thing. Then her mother exited the store and came out and told her it was time to leave. She turned to her mother and said, is she allowed to play on that mountain of sand? And then her mother said, of course she can. And then the little girl said, oh, well, that makes sense. That's why she's so brown then, because she plays on the mountain of sand. Really? So anyway, my mother came out of the store and we got in our vehicle and we were driving home, and I started to recant the story to her. And so, like I said, she's very direct. And when she says things sometimes to us, it's very much, you better listen, you know, it's right at you. So when I told her about the mother's comment that yes, I could play in the mountain sand, I was more curious about why she would ask why I couldn't play. And she said, don't you ever let anybody tell you that you can't play anywhere that you want to play. And so at that point, for me, I'm like, okay, well, if I go to the playground, I'm playing wherever I want. But later on in life, I realized there was more meaning to that. And then I told her the other part of the story where, you know, she thought I was brown because I played in sand. Needless to say, we laughed all the way home about that one at the pure ignorance. But the reason I told you that story is because as Black women, I believe we're always on a journey, whether if it's as little girls, as teenagers, as women, at the beginning of our career, at the middle, or at the end. We are always and will always be on a journey. And through each stage of our journey, I think there will be those same mountains of sand that I just talked about. And they may present themselves to us as our friends, our teachers, people that we believe are our allies. Sometimes, you know, we get confused. Maybe they're not really our allies. And they may present themselves to us in the workplace as our clients, our colleagues, our bosses, or the systems and the institutions that we work in. And so the list goes on. Regardless, the impact is that for us as Black women, it feels like injustice and inequity. So for me, I always wanted to be a leader. I always thought, even from that moment when I was chatting about what happened to me, I thought, you know what, I'm going to do something great. I want to be a leader. And so when I think about injustice and inequities, it came natural to me that that was something I was going to start to explore and how I could make a difference and make a change. And the first time I ever got a chance to lead actually was because of Mayann, because she offered me a position within the provincial government where I had my first opportunity to lead. And so there we go again, you know, building each other up and picking each other up. And too often we're not in leadership positions to do that. So when we are in those opportunities and we have that privilege to help others out who look like us, then I think it's upon us to do something. But I also think it's upon us as Black women to make sure that we're equipped and prepared to take on that opportunity at the same time. So throughout the course of my career, I worked in the provincial government. I worked there for 9 years. And my last job was with Mayann, when she was the CEO at the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission. And it was a wonderful opportunity. And when I look back at it, I can tell you that I was in the provincial government for 9 years as a term. And so for me at that point, I was waiting for something more permanent to come along, and it didn't come along. But the whole time I worked within the provincial government, I believed I found my voice. I'm like, I had no problem speaking about issues and making my voice be heard at the table. But as soon as I moved on to the federal government, my job changed. And if any of you know about Department of National Defence and Canadian Armed Forces, it's an environment that is very entrenched in tradition. And so I didn't know what I was walking into. I was walking into an environment where I was one of every time. And so I would find myself at the beginning, that was in 2005, sitting in meetings where I didn't use my voice. I didn't use my voice at all. And I thought, wow, I thought I was good at this. I'm not very good at this at all. And I felt like my voice didn't have the same power, or it had no power. So I sat there in silence. I sat in silence because of fear. And although fear is just an emotion, like it's an emotion no different than compassion or empathy. I mean, compassion and empathy are things we do easily, but somehow fear creates this visceral response in us. And so I found myself fearful and silent. What I didn't realize when I was responding that way was that the very organization, institution that I was working in, that all of us work in, relies very much on our silence. And the silence that they rely on is the silence that we don't question or challenge the status quo. So, as I said, within Department of National Defense, Canadian Armed Forces, the environment is very much, for me as a leader, a white male dominant structure, an institution entrenched in tradition and things that everybody's used to doing. And although I sat at the leadership table for a period of time, it was probably about a year that I start to recognize this. I believed that the power, authority, and privilege that these white men in the room had far exceeded anything my voice had to offer. And I was fearful, so I was silent. Fearful that should my opinion differ, that could I potentially lose my job? Fearful that I might be judged or not invited back to the table. I can't tell you what felt worse, the fact that I was sitting there in silence because I wanted to talk so bad, or the fact that they didn't get to know everything I had to bring to the table. And that was not how I saw my journey at all. And I can't really tell you exactly when it happened. I can tell you the moment that I turned my fearfulness into fearlessness. So it's funny. It's funny because I've been through many ceremonies within Department of National Defense. It's a place very ceremonial. It's a ceremony for everything, I think. So this particular day, there was a ceremony, and they said, okay, so all the senior leadership are going to walk in together. So you're going to walk in with the senior leadership. And I'm okay. And so of course the Admiral will go first and everybody else will follow. And as I was waiting outside to walk in, I looked around and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm the only woman. I'm the only person who's Black, and I'm the youngest one standing here. So this is interesting. And so as I started to walk in, I started all of a sudden I felt like, wow, this is powerful. I feel very powerful. And all of a sudden my body started to feel different. Everything about me felt different. I thought, this is powerful. I can't wait to walk in here. But I became very in tune with what was around me as well. And what I started to realize is everybody was walking in the room. I was watching everybody else's response. And as I walked in the room, I could see that there were double takes looking. I could feel that there was a question about why is she here and what is this about? And actually for me, I learned later on through conversation after the ceremony that people actually asked me that question, who are you? Why are you here? But I didn't see them ask anybody else that. But I didn't mind them asking me that because I felt powerful. And I felt powerful and I felt confident in what I wanted to tell them as to why I was there. And at the same time, I felt grateful. I know that sounds weird, but I felt grateful. And I know you're probably thinking, why would you feel grateful for that experience? I felt grateful because I really enjoy the place that I work in. And I don't think, but for the challenging environment that I'm in, I would have never been pushed to truly understand what bringing power to my voice meant, because I thought I already had it, but clearly I didn't. And I learned how to have power in my voice in any circumstance. And sometimes as Black women, I think we need to see that the most challenging situations and environments and experience are sometimes where we find our growth opportunity. So that's my first nugget for everybody, is sometimes when we're faced with those things, to not see them as an obstacle, but to see them as an opportunity. And at that moment, you might actually find your voice. So as much as finding your voice feels wonderful and it's exciting, like you had a new gift, I got to tell you that, learning what my voice was, I started to change the way I led. And so when I told you that I always want to be a leader, what I mean by that is that I always wanted to look for positions that I thought were attached to what would make people see me as a leader. And I think that's where I went wrong. And what I mean by that is earlier in my career, I chased positions and titles, and that I believed equated to leadership. But when I realized I found my voice, I pursued purpose, not position. So that's another thing I want to share with you today. Another nugget is pursue purpose, not position. Because when I started to pursue purpose and not position, how I led was different. How I led was driven by purpose. And who I was as a leader became clear to others. So what I wanted to happen, and for people to see me as a leader, it happened organically. So that would be my next piece of advice. Pursue purpose, not position and titles. So finding your voice is great, but at the same time, I found I had to start reminding myself that how I used it was also significantly important. And so when I find myself often at a table, at a meeting, because I'm always at a table or at a meeting, having conversation and ready to use my voice, I tend to always put myself through a few steps before I speak. And at first I had to think about it. Now I don't have to think about it anymore. So I just want to share with you those 4 steps that I use before I open my mouth, because sometimes I'm sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, I got to say something. I have to say something. Come on, Cora, speak. But I always ask myself a few things. 1, do I believe it? Do I believe what I'm about to say? 2, can I back it up? Do I have the information that I need to back it up? Is there something I can share with them that provides foundation in terms of what it is that I'm suggesting? 3, and this one's tough. I got to tell you, this one's really tough. Can I say it with love and respect? Because I got to tell you, there's days that I do not feel a whole lot of love and respect for what I'm going through. But I always have to think, how do I say that with love and respect? Because at the end of the day, we can reach more people with love than anything else. So how do I say it with love and respect? And 4, can I say it in a way to influence others to follow what I'm about to say? Because sometimes that's difficult. We'll say things, but I have to think about who's in the room and how do I say this in a way that they will follow what it is I'm suggesting. So I can't lie. Even though I apply all of these things, sometimes I don't get it right. And sometimes I don't get the response I anticipated. But honestly, as long as I can put my hand over my heart and say, I followed those 4 steps, then I'm at peace with how I use my voice. So that would be the first thing I'd want to share with you. And so, of course, on any journey, and for me, I'm still in the midst of this journey. I think as Black women, we'll always be on a journey, but it's not easy. So when I think about, where do I get my strength from? And where do I reach back into to help me when I'm struggling or I'm saying, oh my gosh, it's one of those days? Well, as I mentioned to you, my family, my mother was someone who was very much an activist in the community and advocated for equity and justice, as well as my dad. And so I reach back for that resilience and that perseverance, that same resilience and perseverance that they taught us. And I reach out to my family for that resilience and perseverance. The second thing for me is that I'm a woman of faith. So there's a certain verse that comes to mind here, which is Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways, submit to him, and he will make your way straight. And I have to tell you, there are days that I sit at that table and I'm thinking, oh, good Lord, help me get through this. Lord, why did you bring me here? What did you bring me here for? But I believe there's a purpose. So, and honestly, I believe that if God is for me, then who can be against me? So faith is very important to me. The third thing is mentorship. And when I say mentorship, I have I seek lots of different people for mentorship. In fact, there's people that are on this forum that I seek for mentorship, and there are people on this forum who have connected with me. And I think that's sometimes where we miss the mark, is that we forget that we have support mechanisms amongst ourselves. And as Black women, I'm not so sure we do a great job of lifting each other up. And so I think that's important that we do a better job of that. And so I encourage everybody here today to think about who's on this forum and who do you know in the community or anybody that, you know, looks like you that you can reach out to. And I think that's important that we build that camaraderie and that trust and that understanding, because we've at some point all have experienced it. And so, you know, for me, before I finish, I was mindful of the time, and I have notes in front of me because if I didn't stick to them, I'd tell you all kinds of things. You know, a lot of times people say, why do you, you know, if it's so tough, why do you bother? Why do I bother? I can't tell you, like I said, that my journey was or will be easy. What I can tell you is that every time that I walk through a certain door, because I have to tell you that I'm a first all the time in my workplace. Every time I walk through the door, I'm a first. But every time I walk through a certain door as a first, I feel like I'm carrying a community with me. And whatever I do, I intend not to do just for me, but to represent well in an effort to blaze a trail for others. Just like you heard all the other women who spoke before me, they blaze trails. That's my intent as well. So when we're blazing trails, we can't quit. We're there for the right reasons, and they're reasons bigger than ourselves. So that's the piece I want to leave with everybody today. And when I thought about what I was going to say, I wanted to focus on my journey, finding my voice, but also leaving you with some nuggets that you could take away and reflect on for yourself as well. So I just really want to thank everybody for giving me the opportunity to share. And I hope we get this opportunity again to hear more stories and to have this same forum again. So thank you for listening to me.
Cora, thank you so much. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all of our storytellers. You were all phenomenal. Yvonne, Barbara, Sharon, and Cora, we are all very moved and inspired by your stories. Your vulnerability, your truth, standing in your truth, the power that comes from your voices, the intention, the persistence and the strength and the courage that you demonstrate, that you presented throughout your journey and through today. So we are all grateful. Your stories certainly have provided us with so much food for thought. And I'm just very conscious of time. This is all so wonderful. We're capturing all of this information. But for the sake of time, I think we will allow for one question. And folks have been kind enough to send some questions into us. And I'm just going to ask this one that stands out. And I'm going to invite any of our storytellers to respond to this question. When and how can you best make a complaint or speak truth to power that does not jeopardize your career? So would any of our storytellers like to respond to that question, or maybe each of you just quickly provide a short response?
I can take a moment
Oh, sure,
to
please.
respond. Just to tell you what I did, but it was a process. And what I did, I went to looked at the human resource departments who had leadership there. And it didn't matter whether they had diversity programs or anything. I always started there, had conversations, because I've been already carrying my notebook and my pen. I had information to provide to any human resource department. So if it was a union group, I had the information. So that's where I would start. And start there after speaking to management, but in a way in which it's not going to jeopardize your job. Well, if your workplace is a proper workplace, they don't mind you bringing those things to their attention. Just be mindful that if nothing happens, or if there's no process to help you, you have other things to go to. And what I loved when I was at Dalhousie, Heather Chandler, who was there at the time, was wonderful in terms of giving me some strategic directions on how to deal with that manager. And they worked really well. But I had to be keen. I had to have all of my information, and I had to know what I was doing before I stepped out. That's just my little tidbit there.
That's great. Thank you so much, Yvonne. Cora, Sharon, or Barbara, would you like to respond? Would you like me to repeat that question? Why don't I repeat it? When and how can you best make a complaint or speak truth to power that does not jeopardize a career?
First of all, I would say that that's a really tough one because not in my career, but throughout university, I could tell you that I did use my voice, and I followed every step possible to use my voice that I was given. And so, as Yvonne mentioned, first going to HR, but within the university structure, I used everything at my disposal. But I could tell you that at the end of the day, there was nothing that controlled the outcome. And the outcome was not what I anticipated at all. So I will say that out loud. I can't say that I've ever made complaints that cost me my career or my job, but I have made complaints. And I think the first step, like Yvonne said, that's important is to go to your HR department, but it's also important for you to know your environment and to know who around you that you can trust and speak to as well. That's important because there's a lot of insight in those conversations. But I would never say that you should never make a complaint, but I think it's important that how you make a complaint is what's essential and how you communicate it. And so I think it's important, and something that we do in our workplace, and I don't think it's in every workplace, is that, seek somebody who can coach and mentor you when you're ready to have that conversation, how you're going to propose it, so that it comes out in a way that even though you know you're complaining, that the way you're communicating it is a way that you're trying to bring to light situations that are happening and the impact it has on you, as opposed to saying, I'm filing a complaint. So for me, I think that has more weight, because when people understand impact, then they're more apt to respond in a way that will lead to some resolution. That's just the advice I have.
That's great. Thank you so much, Cora. I appreciate that. And no pressure, Sharon or Barbara. If you have
well, I'll take it.
But okay, great.
You're throwing me a ball. I can feel it, Crystal. So I'll catch it. I think that what I would say is understand the opportunity. When you speak truth to power, it isn't about getting it off of your chest. And I would prefer not to think of it in terms of a complaint. My way of approaching things is to speak truth to power. And yes, there is risk. Remember, I said, don't be risk averse, be risk certain. So understand the risk that you're taking. However, also think about a win-win opportunity. When you speak truth, think about the win-win opportunity. How does the person who is receiving the information understand this to be a win for them as well as you? Be strategic in terms of connecting what you're asking about or what you're recommending in, so that it may be helpful to the work of the public or private sector, whichever you are in. Be collective, more, in unity there is strength. If it's not just you who wants to speak this truth, then strategize with others and speak that truth either as a group or even individually, but collectively, if you see what I'm saying. And I do want to underscore what was just said about how you say it. What your mother told you was, it isn't always what you say, it's how you say it. So never forget mother's instructions, because it will be good for you for the rest of your life. Thank you.
Excellent advice. I think many of us can relate to that, Sharon. Thank you. Listen, thank you so much to all of our storytellers. We really, really appreciate. And I know that we could spend much more time. There's a number of great questions that have been coming in, but unfortunately, due to time, we need to move on. But those questions will all be captured in the report, because even though they weren't answered, they certainly are going to provide insights into the final report. So thank you all for that. What I would like to do now, this is a really important piece of the form, because we want to involve the audience now. We really want to get some insight perspective from the voices in the audience, so that we can roll it into next week's form when we speak to our senior decision makers. So we have a series of 3 key questions. We have a number of individuals who have agreed to be facilitators. So what's going to happen is you are going to be assigned to a breakout room. And once you arrive in your breakout room, there will be a facilitator there, or 2 or 3, and they will kind of introduce themselves and facilitate based upon the question that they will be leading. It's really an opportunity for you to share as much ideas that you can to contribute. And we'll come back and we will collect all of the responses that we have from those small group breakout groups, and we will transfer that into the report and carry it over into next week's discussion as well. Okay, it looks like folks are arriving back. I'll just give it a couple of minutes so that Zoom can get everybody back into the main room. All right. So thank you very much, everyone. I really appreciate you taking the time to share your insights. And while a short time, I know you could have spent much more time on the question that you had assigned with your group, but thank you for sharing your insights, and special thanks to the facilitators as well. We wouldn't have been able to do this without you. So I really do hope that you've had an opportunity at least to start sharing some of your thoughts on how the information that you've received today has landed on you, and your ideas on strategies that you'd like to see in the future. I also want to say that I do respect, and appreciate everybody's time. And I just want to, send a special shout out to all of you for taking the time to stay with us for overtime, because we are well over time, but we're drawing near to the end, almost ready to conclude. I want to remind everyone that we will be collecting all of the notes. Our session today, all the deliberations are being recorded. So we will be rolling all of this information up into a final report once we complete next Friday's session. So we're really hoping that the results from this forum can really help us to begin to understand the way forward together, so that we can really elevate that conversation about Black women in leadership and identify ways that we can improve upon the experiences of Black women who are aspiring to be leaders and those who are currently leaders. We'll be also posting a short evaluation, and we really would want your feedback is very valuable. So if you don't mind, once you see it posted, if you don't mind taking a few moments to give us your feedback, we would really appreciate that. The other thing that I wanted to mention to you is that we'll be also posting on Twitter a hashtag Black Women Leadership, or you can email Sherry Hodds at Atlantic School of Theology, Leadership Learning. So please, if you don't mind, make note of that. Next Friday on November 6th, we will be talking about really how do we move forward, but involving decision makers in that discussion. And we'll be bringing forward some of the comments in your responses to the questions that you've just worked on in your groups. So that's going to be quite exciting, and I'm looking forward to that conversation as well. But before we do conclude today, I really want to take this opportunity, first and foremost, to thank the Honourable Mayann Francis for your remarks of inspiration for our forum today. Thank you to Kathy Martin for starting off our day with an opening prayer that was very powerful and moving. Thank you as well to Yvonne Atwell, Barbara Manning, Sharon Davis-Murdoch, and Cora Tolliver for really standing in your truth and courageously sharing your very powerful stories of your journeys. We've all been very moved. Thank you. Thank you all for all of your outstanding contributions. We really appreciate it. To our facilitators, once again, thank you for your time and staying with us beyond our scheduled time frame and sharing and providing your time in collecting that information from the discussions. So we really rely upon you to get, to hold on to those notes, and they're very precious, those notes that you have, and share those with Sherry. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank our presenting sponsor, RBC. We really appreciate your support. Thank you to our co-host, the Atlantic School of Theology and Mount St. Vincent University. We wouldn't have been able to do this without you. And thank you to our supporters, the Mounts Business and Tourism Department and the African Canadian Women in the Public Service Network. And I have to say a special shout out and a special thank you to the Forum's Planning Committee, who really have pulled this entire event together. Sherry Hodds, Director of Leadership and Learning, the Atlantic School of Theology. Dr. Malika Das and Louise Adungo, Cabinet Advisor, Province of Nova Scotia, for all of your hard work in organizing this forum. We appreciate you. And finally, a thank you to all of you who have participated today in this forum, who have agreed to stay on a little beyond our scheduled time. We really appreciate you as well for contributing to this moment and making this a truly memorable day. And I hope that you can all join us next Friday and take part in part 2 of our forum. Everybody, please take good care. It's Friday, so enjoy the rest of your afternoon and have a marvelous weekend. And we do look forward to seeing you next week for part 2. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.